Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members, officers, and members of the public who may be watching on YouTube or even live. This is the Planning Committee meeting of Woking Borough Council, Wednesday, the 13th of October 2021. This is a hybrid meeting. This is because some people, most of the officers here are not with us. They are on Teams. And as I said, the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. I'm Councillor Chris Bowring and I chair the meeting. The Planning Committee, most of whom are in the chamber, I think all of them this evening, consists of the 11 elected borough councillors and is supported by a variety of officers. There are representatives on the committee from all four political groups on the council. The officers here this evening, those who are on Teams, we have Justin Turvey, who's the operational manager for development management, Chris Easton, head of transport, drainage and compliance, Neil Allen, who's a senior specialist legal services, Megan Summerfield is solicitor apprentice, Connor Corrigan, service manager, planning and delivery. In the chamber, on my right, Callum Wernham, democratic and electoral services specialist and clerk to the committee, and Madam Shopland, who is also a democratic and electoral services specialist. The case officers are Christopher Howard, Simon Taylor and Adriana Gonzalez. This is a quasi-judicial meeting with formal procedures which must be adhered to. For each application, firstly, the planning officer will present the application. Then only those speakers who are pre-registered to speak will be called to address the committee. No one else, including borough councillors, town and parish councillors, agents, applicants, objectors, supporters, are permitted to address the committee, ask questions, interrupt or disrupt the meeting. Everyone has had the chance to comment on the applications through the normal consultation process. Please note that there is a strict time limit for speakers of 3 minutes for each of the 4 categories: town and parish councils, objectors, supporters and borough members affected by the application. Members of the committee are more impressed by the quality of what you say rather than how long you speak for. But above all, please stay within your time limit. Following the registered speakers, members of the committee will discuss and debate the application and seek clarification from the council's professional planning officers in order to try to reach a decision. The decision reached by the committee may or may not agree with that recommended by the presenting case officer. Finally, it is the committee's responsibility to determine any valid planning application placed before it using current national and local planning policies and relevant decisions of the Independent Planning Inspectorate. Our role is not to suggest alterations to applications, nor to consider whether they are a good idea, whether they're needed, whether they are too costly, and if there are alternative uses of the land or site or more suitable uses of land elsewhere. If you're joining us remotely, please ensure your camera is switched on, only when you're speaking. And for everyone, please make sure your microphone is switched on when speaking and off at other times. And in accordance with the advice of Public Health England, could those present in the chamber, I speak most of the time, so could most people keep their masks on, please, when you're not speaking? Thank you very much. So now move on to the agenda. And the first item is apologies for absence. I think we have Gary Cowan, Pauline Jorgensen, just those two. Minutes of the last meeting. Angus, I believe you may have an amendment.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Even though I wasn't at the meeting, I did notice at the top of page 13, the resolution of application 211081 referred to asking the applicant to work with the farm owner regarding the possibility of dual use of the land. My understanding is that the council owns that land, and that should refer to the farm tenant.
Thank you, Angus. That's a minor amendment to the minutes. Does any member have a difficulty with that or wish to comment on it? If not, I'll go to the, oh, well, I propose that. I'll propose that amendment. Could I have a second, Angus, second it? So if you go to the minutes as amended, those in favour, please show. Thank you, that's unanimous. So the minutes are approved and I will sign them. Or should I sign them? You need the amendment. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Is your hand up, Stephen? No, sorry. Are there any applications to be deferred and withdrawn? I don't think there are.
There's none, Chairman.
Thank you, Justin. So we move on to the first item, which is application 211841, which is land north and south of Cutbush Lane in Shinfield. And the case officer is Christopher Howard. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening, and thank you, Chairman. And I'm just going to get the slides loaded up. If you can just tell me if they're coming out all right your end. Last time I had a couple of issues in terms of them being the right size. So
yes, we can see those.
I'll just, no, get those open. Bear with me, if the technology will allow me. Are they coming out full size there now?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's perfect. Okay. The application for us tonight is for full planning permission for the Science and Creative Media Hub for the erection of film stages and associated workshops, together with office spaces, ancillary uses and equipment stores and further ancillary facilities. This is on land within and adjacent to the Thames Valley Science Park. The application has been publicised as a potential departure for the local plan and was accommodated with an environmental impact assessment. The presentation will begin by looking at the site context and constraints. I will then set out the detail of the application itself and the proposed structures, etc., and conclude with a section on the planning balance. So just turning to the site area now, the application site is shown outlined here in red. It relates to around 27 hectares of land for the proposed studio use within and adjacent to the Thames Valley Science Park site, which is shown here outlined in blue. The land outside the area in blue is designated as countryside, wherein there is a general presumption for not supporting development in these locations unless the criteria outlined in policy CP11 is met. The application does not specifically meet any of these criteria defined, but for the reasons set out in the report and further discussed in the presentation, it is considered acceptable. The extent of the science park land for both phases were granted in 2010 and 2017 for the phase 2 land. To date, 2 buildings have been erected on the site linked to the applications, the Gateway building and the Rutherford Cancer Treatment Centre. Planning permission for a studio on this land was also resolved to approve in July of this year. The Thames Valley Science Park was originally envisaged to serve as a hub for innovation and technology, although development here has been slow, as can be seen. The use of the land is governed by our planning policies again, and the proposed studios would not in the strictest terms meet the criteria outlined within these policies. The original policies were for science and innovation and textbook form of uses. There are, however, a degree of synergy with these, and the merits of the application is set in the report and will be further discussed later on. In terms of the location development, it is on land adjacent to the east of Shinfield. This image is captured by a drone footage broadly to the north of the site, and the land is shown outlined in red. The site is located to the east of phase 1 of the Thames Valley Science Park, which is shown outlined in blue again. And the first 2 phase buildings and support infrastructure are evident within the blue line area to support that first phase of the development. To the east, the British Museum archive can be seen, and the site is well linked by the strategic transport network with the M4 motorway in close proximity. There is also good public transport servicing the site, and in recent years the Eastern Relief Road was delivered in full. The site is considered to be sustainable due to the transport network, access to public transport and the infrastructure that has been delivered to support the housing growth. Recent housing developments are also shown to the east of Shinfield as part of the housing allocated for this area. In terms of development parcel plan, the development site can broadly be split into 2 parcels as shown in this plan. Land to the north of Cutbush Lane has been identified in the report, and for the purposes of the presentation, as this is referred to as the northern facility. The land to the south is referred to as the southern facility. The southern land contains the temporary studio, which was permitted in spring of this year and is largely built out with an operator occupying part of the site from the start of this week. Taking a look at some site photos now. This is the main access that serves the Science Park site. The principal access road is Eastern Relief Road, and the internal access to the Science Park has been delivered. As can be seen, the site has been served by public transport with a regular bus service delivered as part of the South Leam bus strategy, and you can just see a bus emerging from the site in the background of that photo there. This photo is mostly overlooking the northern facility and is taken from the eastern boundary. The site is dissected by Pearman's Lane, and this is established vegetation which will be mostly retained in the site layout. The British Museum building can be seen in the background, and just to the foreground of that British Museum facility, you can see the extent of the phase one of the delivery of the southern facility for the temporary studio consent. This viewpoint is taken from the pedestrian cycle bridge over the M4 motorway. The gateway building can be made out in the background. Again, the vegetation defining Pearman's Lane can be seen split into two main development parcels serving the northern facility. Taking a look at some of the heritage assets in the next two slides. This is the relationship with Office A to Cutbush Manor, Barn and Badger Cottage, which are Grade 2 listed buildings. The non-designated Shinfield Grange site is also highlighted. As can be seen, there is a strong landscape between the application site and the heritage assets, which is well established. For Old House Farmhouse and Barn, this is located to the south of the temporary site. Again, the relationship is also shown to Shinfield Grange. The Heritage Officer has assessed the impact of the built form and heritage assets in the area and identifies the harm to be less than substantial. The overarching benefits associated with the application, which will be further outlined later, are considered to offset any significant harm to the setting of these buildings. This is recent drone footage of the southern facility, which is largely delivered. The stage building is yet to be clad in this building, which is the main building in the background. Although work for this is underway at the moment, and the cladding will be similar in colour to the roof and the workshops that surround them. The ancillary workshops to support the filming activities are also delivered, as is much of the supporting infrastructure. Now moving on to the details of the applications itself. This slide shows the site layout. The southern facility remains broadly as planned under the temporary consent, although the workshop to the front is a little bit smaller. 18 stage buildings are proposed, and these are shown in light yellow. To support the filming activities and prop setup, there are 8 workshops that are identified, which are shown in dark blue. And there are 4 office buildings, further office space provided above the workshop, which is shown in turquoise blue. Sorry, just a correction, I think I said 8 stage buildings, 18 stage buildings on that one. A welfare facility is also proposed adjacent to Pearman's Lane in the area it's circled, which is referred to as a hub. This would house catering facilities and provide space for staff to relax within. Office A is located outside the main complex, but as shown, there's good separation to Cutbush Manor, Barn and Badger Cottage, which overcomes any significant amenity impacts and heritage impacts. The relatively isolated nature of the site also means there'll be no further significant impacts for the wider site in respect to any other residential dwelling in the area, given the level of separation to these. In regard to the impact on the wider highways transport network, the application has been accommodated with a transport appraisal. This identifies the consented development and forecast flows using our Woking strategic transport model. The forecast flows are based on similar studio developments such as Shepperton and Pinewood, and there's 3 others. The transport analysis demonstrates that forecast vehicle movements will be lower than the extent Science Park planning permissions. This slide also shows that the trip pattern will be more distributed throughout the day. The forecast Science Park trip rates are shown here, are shown in red, and the projected trip rates are also shown in blue on this slide. So there's a more of a sort of dispersed pattern throughout the day rather than peaks and troughs, as you can see on the consented science park schemes. The reason why these rates differ is due to the pattern of works for the studios. It's not a typical 9 to 5 operation associated with offices, and the transport assessment has been assessed by the highways officer, who supports the impact on a local and wider highway network. For site access and landscaping, the site will be served by the Science Park Eastern Relief Road roundabout. This feeds into the northern facility via the Science Park Link Road. The southern facility would be served by, in part, the Link Road and a short section of Cutbush Lane East. There would also be a construction and emergency exit for the access for the northern facility feeding onto Cutbush Lane. A secondary access serving the northern facility would also link to the Phase 1 Science Park internal road, and this feeds onto a decked car park area. Further surface parking is provided throughout the site, and there are more spaces distributed around the stage buildings and workshop buildings in addition to the sort of main areas that have been highlighted here. In total, there would be a total of 1,375 spaces delivered for the studios. The parking numbers, again, have been based on comparisons of other sites in Pinewood and Shepperton and 3 others. There is cycle parking provided and motorcycle parking together with blue badge spaces, all of which are well distributed within the site for the end users. The site incorporates soft landscaping in the parking areas and on the site boundaries, which will enhance the existing established vegetation that will be mostly retained in the site layout. Turning to the security of the site and just a bit more detail on sort of how the interaction works in terms of getting vehicles off the road. The layout has been configured to consider the required offset to prevent traffic queuing onto the external roads. For the northern facility, the entrance is set well back within the site with a lay-by for heavy goods vehicles. The security for the southern facility is also set back, which will allow for checks to be made within the site. In addition, within this area, there is a proposed additional bus stop for the northern facility, which will extend the South M4 bus strategy. This has frequent services for the existing science park, but the additional stop will make it an attractive option for future employees. Looking to the detailed design of the buildings now, this plan shows stage 5. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these, but this is one of the largest stage buildings, so we use this as an example, and has an overall height of 22 metres. The applicant has considered the impact of the taller buildings through locating these towards the centre of the site where possible, and offsetting these with lower buildings, which gives a degree of transition. The application was supported with a landscape and visual assessment, which included photo montages to assess the impact of the development on the surrounding landscape. Overall, this demonstrated the additional built form would have a limited impact on long distance views, although buildings will be clearly evident locally. The landscape officer has assessed the information and supports the findings together with a landscaping strategy. This includes substantial planting on the site boundaries, which, when established, will soften the development. This slide shows a typical workshop building which supports the film production and the sound stages. As with the stage building, the workshops are clad in dark grey materials. The design approach is considered to be acceptable and limits the visibility of the buildings to the wider landscape. This plan shows Office A, which will support the filming activities. The design for all the office suites is similar, with curtain glazing and dark grey cladding. Some of the offices have been designed to wrap around the stage buildings, which not only helps to offset the height of these, but also provides natural surveillance towards Cutbush Lane, which will make it feel safer for users. The next few slides show some visualisations of some of the proposed buildings, get a bit of life. This is the entrance to the northern facility with the offices that wrap around the stage buildings to frame the entrance. This gives a good impression of the level of space that has been planned in for security area. And in addition, it will help to show the landscaping strategy for the site. As can be seen, there's planting on the central islands here, which provides a sense of an avenue form of sense of arrival. Further planting is also shown here on the boundaries of the site. This slide shows a closer view of the entrance, showing more details of the office space that wrap around the stages. The underpass into the site and landscaping strategy, together with the branding, strongly defines the entrance of the facility. This visualisation is one of the stage buildings, which gives a good impression of the cladding. The lower level is concrete, which is designed to be more robust for operations that will take place around the buildings. And this is a typical workshop that will serve as prop making and storage for activities within the sound stages. These will provide vocational opportunities to skilled trades such as carpenters, costume makers, electricians, etc. This slide shows a hub building. This will be constructed by repurposed shipping containers, and as advised, it will serve as welfare facilities for future employees. This image shows the multi-storey car park, which serves around half the parking for the site. To minimise the impact with the height of the building, the car park would be cut into the landscape. As such, the first four levels face towards the science park will in effect be subterranean when viewed from the south. Finally, for perspectives, this is an overarching view of the facility from the north of the site on the lower early side of the motorway, similar to where the drone footage shown earlier was taken from. There have been a couple of changes made since to this. There are further decks on the car park, which have been as a result of modifications to the surface parking, but it gives a good overall impression of how the facility would sit into the landscape. Finishing up with the planning balance now. This is fully set out in the report, although the main benefits and adverse impacts are going to be sort of run through in the next couple of slides. In terms of benefits the facility deliver, there would be a significant contribution to employment for both construction, the construction phase and the post-occupation of the facility. Around 1,500 direct jobs would be generated from the occupation of the studios and a similar level of indirect jobs associated with its use. For the construction phase, there would be around 1,400 direct and indirect jobs generated, and that's for each direct and indirect sector. The result would be a gross added value of £46 million locally, which raises to £113 million nationally, as there's a multiplier built into this, which is a significant contribution. The construction phase itself would also generate a further £341 million over a 27-month build-out period in terms of gross value added. The site is in a sustainable location with all of the main enabling highway works delivered as part of the housing growth. The facility can therefore be constructed with minimal impact on the highway network. The site is served by public transport and in terms of its regional location is well placed with good links to road, rail, airports and other studio facilities. The application has demonstrated that it would not prejudice any development coming forward in the area, and a highway safeguarding plan has been secured through the Section 106 agreement, which shows that the roads could be upgraded if there is future growth, but that's subject to a different process. The application would deliver footpath upgrades to footpath 4, which will provide good links to Arborfield and the wider area. There will be significant public benefits associated with the delivery of these facilities. The applicant has also agreed to provide street lighting on Cutbush Lane East from the British Museum to Lower Early Way, which will enhance perceived safety for pedestrians and cyclists. Amendments have been secured through discussions from the application in terms of sustainable energy. The applicant has increased this to 20% of the demand for the facility. And in addition to this, they are targeting BREEAM Excellent for the buildings. This is in addition to a 10% biodiversity net gain, which will deliver significant environmental benefits. And it's a good comprehensive package in regards to that. There are strong links with the promoter of the facility to the University of Reading, who have a Department of Media and established Department of Media. Co-working between these groups was a principal objective of the science policies, so it fits in some degree in terms of sort of collaboration. The operator intends to outreach to local schools through a statement of community engagement together with the borough and parish councils. The community engagement strategy also identifies further stakeholders which could foster training and apprenticeships and create further employment opportunities. Linked to training, the applicant has submitted a bespoke employment skills plan for the facility, which will seek to employ where possible local people and offer opportunities for training and apprenticeships, and this has been worked up as part of the Section 106 agreement. With regards to impacts of the proposal, development would result in a loss of countryside, which, as advised, is contrary to policy. In mitigation to this, there is a good package of landscaping is being secured, which will help soften the development on the landscape. It also is on part of the land that was allocated in terms of the phase 2 science park land. So a lot of the land has already benefited from planning permission in the area. It does not strictly meet the test of the science park policies, but as outlined, there is a degree of synergy in terms of collaboration, and as outlined in the report, the film industry does foster innovation to some degree. The benefits of this are considered to outweigh any harm to the countryside and the science park policies, and it should be noted that the local parish, Shinfield Parish, fully support the application. The application will result in loss of farmland, although a significant amount has been identified for biodiversity net gain. The land that has been secured for biodiversity net gain will secure habitats in the long term, which helps compensate for the loss of arable land. And arable land doesn't tend to be that highly scored in terms of biodiversity net gain because it obviously gets changed every year. And again, a good proportion of the site was allocated for science park, which limits the loss of the arable land. The site would generate further traffic on the highway network, but as advised, this will be to a lesser extent than the extent of science park planning permissions. The trips are also better distributed throughout the day, as already advised. The construction of the development will generate a degree of noise and disturbance for local residents. The construction hours are, however, controlled by condition, as is a comprehensive construction environmental management plan. Much of the facility is located away from common boundaries, which also help minimise the disruption, as does the fact that the infrastructure is already in place for the main access to the studio site. There will also be a degree of noise and disturbance associated with the use of the facility once operational, but this will be limited given that most of the activities will be undertaken within soundproof stage areas. And again, the site is relatively self-contained, which overcomes any significant amenity impacts. The studio would have a degree of impact on the setting of the local listed buildings and the Grange. This is, however, identified as less than substantial harm, which is supported by the Conservation Officer. The landscape strategy helps to offset some of this harm, but overall in the planning balance, the benefits of the application outweigh any significant harm. So in summary, it's considered that the social, environmental and economic benefits of the development are considered to outweigh the harm to the countryside and conflict with science park policies. There are no significant impacts envisaged on neighbour amenity, heritage, highways, landscape and biodiversity. And a good package of Section 106 materials have been secured and agreed and are being worked up, which will secure the off-site public right-of-way improvements and the street lighting and biodiversity net gain, etc. Coming on to the recommendation, we've got a 4-tiered recommendation today, and it's slightly amended from that one that was set out in the report. So just to go through this is to recommend that members allow us to refer the application to the Secretary of State for approval, following and to secure the completion of the Section 106 agreement, conditions set out in the report to the members update, and subject to there being no significant issues raised by technical external consultees, being received by Monday, the 18th of October, then to approve the application. On this point, the letters that were sent out to the technical experts were given an incorrect date for responses on it. This did not affect the neighbours, but if the consultees come back with anything that could be overcome by a condition, we request that we can agree this with the chairman of the planning committee in consultation with the director of delivery. And recommendation C has unfortunately just fallen off the end there, but after infrastructure, this is to refuse the application. It's basically to refuse the application should a section 106 agreement not be agreed by 6 months of a committee resolution, and delegate to the head of development management to refuse the application. And that's it for the presentation at this stage. Just a few points on the members update, the run through. I'm just going to turn to that. On page 19, outlined, the application is a potential departure to the local plan and EIA. So that was picked up in terms of this description of the application, but wasn't outlined within the report. But all letters sent out did reflect that, so that's absolutely fine. On page 21, update recommendation A and C. And there's just one in terms of the text that's been set out below, and just from the third bullet point to the bottom, in terms of biodiversity net gain, there's a typo in there. There's an exclamation mark in front of the which should be a 1 instead of an exclamation mark for the 10%. On page 22, just a bit of clarification in terms of biodiversity net gain. Basically, the applicant has used a DEFRA biodiversity matrix to calculate the sort of baseline conditions, pre-development conditions, and look to secure biodiversity enhancements. These will be secured off-site, and land has been set aside for these areas with a different approach in terms of securing a net gain. 10% above the baseline figure, which has been supported by the biodiversity officer. On page 22, there is the plans list, which is quite extensive, and just flip over to page 6 of the update now. Not to go through those in any particular detail. Some minor amendments in terms of pages 22, 23, 25, 26, 31, 32, just update the conditions as have been set out here. On page 32, condition 36, just to clarify, the community engagement strategy includes local members as part of identified stakeholders, so that condition does secure that. In terms of community engagement, further details will be provided for us. On page 33, condition 39, replace the word insert with the plan stated on the update. On page 32, fourth paragraph, correction to the report, the ditch application was approved yesterday. Page 43, on other representations, just on a point on this one, this is in regards to a letter received from the residents of Cutbush Manor, Cutbush Barn and Badger Cottage, and it was a letter sent in by their consultants, Iceni Planning. For the sake of transparency, it was felt that this should be grouped together with the responses that are received from other consultees. So I've set out the main issues in the update there, and what our stance is on those. Just to apply that within that section, rather than being grouped into the neighbour section. We did in the neighbour section pick up on the points, but we grouped it into an impact on heritage, an overarching impact on heritage. So I think, for the sake of fairness, we put that there. And again, on page 45, we had an initial consultation response since the publication report, and that again, there was another further letter from Iceni in regards to the Badger Cottage, Cutbush Manor and Cutbush Barn. They support the removal of the post-screening facility, but still object to the Office A position. Thames Water have written in again since the consultation period's passed. They have stated that we don't require condition 34, so suggest that is deleted. That's in regard to foul water. Highways England have come back with a no objection. Historic England have not made a comment. And Natural England have no further comments. And on page 53, paragraph 35, insert the text on the page 8 of the update. It's just the text in terms of the procedural means to refer to the Secretary of State. On page 67, For parking, we don't have any, just to clarify, Wokingham don't have any set standards for a studio form of use for parking numbers for a facility such as a studio. This was not envisaged when the parking standards were set up, and I don't think we can cater for every case scenario, unfortunately. But mindful of this, the applicant's transport consultant has done a robust review of 5 other comparable sites, which are in similar positions in terms of location and in terms of access to public transport, public transport network, to provide these. And the worst case scenario has been applied in respect to parking. On page 69, paragraph 113, just to clarify that the heritage assets cited there are grade 2 listed. And on page 69, paragraph 115, the landscaping details will be secured by condition 26. We have also had a request from the crime prevention officer, a late request from a crime prevention officer who didn't respond to the first round consultee comments, I should add, in terms of requesting an extension to the time period for response to the end of October. We can't really agree that extension, but what I would say is the level of natural surveillance afforded by the offices and the use of the estate in its totality would mean that there would be a safer feeling within that area. So unfortunately, probably can't accommodate that request for extension. Had they come in on the first round, then we would have had a look at them. And that's about it for me. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Well, we have some speakers. Getting an echo. We have some speakers. First of all, Mark Cochrane, who's a neighbour, is unable to be here, so I've asked Vice Chairman Angus to read his statement out. If you do that, Angus, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I start, may I just stress that I'm reading this on behalf of Mark Cochrane, who I have never met or spoken to. In general, we support the overall application by Shinfield Studios and recognise the benefits it will bring to the local area. However, we object to the positioning of a very large Office A building, which would be close proximity to grade 2 listed buildings. The proposed 4-storey building will be around 50 metres away from Cutbush Manor. To give context, imagine that our property is at the location of the Queen's Head pub in Wokingham. As viewed from the pub, Office A would be the same relative position as the Wokingham Borough Council offices, but would be slightly larger. Buildings in Cutbush Lane, Badger Cottage and Cutbush Manor are all over 400 years old and constructed of timber frame and brick. They're built directly on the London clay and have no foundations. Potential structural impact to these buildings from the nearby building of Office A has not been adequately assessed under the current application by geotechnical investigation or by a specific and detailed engineering analysis. It's also my understanding that the land to be used was bequeathed to the University of Reading with the condition that it was only used for research. Shinfield Studios have stated that Office A would be subleased, and this is therefore an entirely commercial part of the venture. I do not believe it is in the public interest to use green space to build commercial real estate in a market that's already oversaturated. The contractor at the current temporary site for the studios has repeatedly failed to meet the requirements of their planning approval. Work has been conducted outside of approved hours, and Cutbush Lane East continues to be used by site traffic, despite a design and access statement that says that this road will be closed to all motor vehicles. Near misses with pedestrians and cyclists are common. Should this continue, it's highly likely that a serious injury or worse will occur. Due to poor scheduled management, permission has now been given for work every Sunday. Built time for the next phase is approximately at 27 months. Continued lack of scheduled management would inevitably force more weekend work and disruption to nearby residents. In summary, it's our view that the approval of the plans with Office A remaining as it is would result in the local planning authority failing to meet its duty of having special regard to heritage assets as per section 66 of the Planning Act of 1990.
Thank you, Angus. We now have two speakers, Nick Bass-Neal and Nick Smith. And they are going to speak in favour. And you've got 3 minutes to share, gentlemen, please.
Good evening, and thank you for taking the time to hear our application. I'd like to start by thanking the officers for their thorough and comprehensive report, which is before you this evening. I'd also like to take a couple of minutes to share why we want to establish a film and television studio in Shinfield. Content production is one of the fastest growing industries in the UK today, with nearly 4 billion of inward investment each year. However, the government is targeting 6 billion of inward investment by 2025. This is a key policy initiative. To achieve this, though, the UK needs over 1.8 million square feet of new studio space. But we have a real and significant opportunity here to put Shinfield, Wokingham and Berkshire on the global film studio map and develop a bespoke creative cluster. This also supports the university's ambitions for TVSP to develop a wider Cine Valley. The studios will bring inward investment of millions of pounds into the area, creating many local jobs and prosperity which will last long into the future. And to put that point into context, a typical film production will spend about £100 million, of which a significant proportion will be spent locally. A typical production will employ 500 crew, creating many local, highly paid job opportunities. To achieve our ambitions, we have engaged with many stakeholders. We have reached out to Shinfield Parish Council, who have enthusiastically supported this application, and to local primary and secondary schools and colleges whose head teachers have written in support of this application. We have support from the Thames Valley LEP and Chamber of Commerce. We have held 2 online exhibitions this year to engage with local residents, and on both occasions we had over 125 attendees. We have support from the Department of International Trade, from DCMS and from the UK Film Council. We are grateful to all residents and organisations who have written to support our application. In the course of our discussions locally, sustainability has featured at most meetings, and I wanted to reassure everybody that we take this matter very seriously. As already noted, we are targeting BREEAM Excellent for the site. We aim to deliver a 20% net carbon reduction by utilising solar panels. We will ensure our buildings are energy efficient by taking a fabric first approach, and we will not be using any gas on the site, but instead using air source heat pumps. We have also listened to and tried to work closely with our nearest neighbours, and we have reacted to their concerns by moving the cinema and post-production building away from the site entrance to the Gateway 4 plot within the Science Park. And we hope that we have alleviated most of their concerns. So I'd like to finish just by thanking you all for your time, and I hope to be able to bring this exciting development and its associated benefits to Wokingham and Shinfield.
Thank you very much. Chris, I don't know whether you want to come back on some of the points that Mr. Cochrane had in his statement. He spoke about the 50-metre distance to the grade 2 listed buildings. I think that's to the curtilage, isn't it?
That's to the curtilage, yeah, that's measured from the nearest extent of Office A to the curtilage of the listed buildings, which is a significant amount of space. And it's also a fair bit further to the dwelling houses themselves. I think it's around 70 metres or so. So we have looked at this in detail, and we have had advice from the conservation officer. And in this regard, we have to, the harm has been identified as less than substantial. I believe the report that came in from Iceni said that there might be a degree of more than within that category, but you can't assess that under an MPPF. It's either less than substantial or it isn't. There's no sort of tiering within that criteria. So within that context, paragraph 202 of the MPPF is engaged, and that states that the application needs to be assessed against the public benefits, and those have been set out within the report, and it is in this case considered that the public benefits will outweigh any harm. In terms of construction practice, again, I have been mindful in terms of the comments received. I've specifically asked in terms of any piling operations that are required within the areas on that land, on the Office A land, that it not be pile-driven piling, but auger driven piling, which has a much less of an impact in terms of noise and vibration. So we have done that. And just sort of finally on the extended hours, the government response to COVID was to allow us to be flexible for the extended hours. The time in which the studio needed the facility open was time critical around a filming schedule, and we were flexible in some cases there, and we have tried to communicate that with the residents as and when they have requested to do that with us. And in fairness to the studio team, in pretty much all instances, they requested the extension to working hours ahead of doing the works themselves, which can be done the other way around.
Could you just comment on the, I think the suggestion was that this is obviously a commercial enterprise, but that is in some way not compatible with the original intentions of the science park, if I understood what the gentleman was trying to say.
Again, yes. Again, I mean, the science park was originally envisaged in the Southeast Plan back some time ago now, which was revoked. But at that point in time, it envisaged for science and innovation. But as we can see, times have moved on. That's good, sort of nearly 15 odd years ago at least. So basically, we are looking to see whether or not another form of use is appropriate for the site. There is a synergy in terms of some of the science park policies with regards to sort of a degree of innovation. There is a degree of collaboration for it. But as evident from the sort of build out of the science park itself, it has been quite slow. And these science and innovation parks tend to like to cluster in areas such as Cambridge and trying to think of the other one, Oxford. So.
Thank you very much. So come on to members now. Members, comments, please. Start with Andrew. Angus. Sam. Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My many and varied questions were satisfactorily answered during the site visit last week, and I thank everybody involved with that. But out of tonight's presentation, I do have two further questions, and I'd also like to ask that the Planning Committee consider a possible additional condition. My first question relates to Mr. Cockram's concerns regarding possible impact of, I believe it's Office Building A, on the future and the fabric of the listed buildings. He referred, for example, to the fact, my understanding is that there are no substantial foundations to these listed buildings. And my concern is, or my question to officers is, has that issue been considered as part of this application? The second question, again arising out of matters that have been raised this evening, refers to the multi-deck car park. There's reference when we saw the CGIs to additional decks to those that were shown in the photo. And I note that on page 2 in the members' update, there's a reference to levels 10 and 11 in the multi-decked car park. My question is, just for clarification, how many decks are there in total at the highest point in this above ground decks in the car park, and what will be the visual appearance of the car park? What sort of colorings are used? How visible will lighting from the car park be? So there are two questions, and I would like, if it's okay, Chair, afterwards to ask us to consider a possible further condition to this application.
Yes, of course. Chris?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the car park itself, it's 11. It has 11 levels within it. But much like the sort of, if you think of the town centre car park, the levels within these areas are split. So It's not 11 stories in height as such. It's I was just trying to find the height of it, but it's lower than the stage building itself in the report. I think I said it out in the report. I haven't got it off the top of my head, but so that would limit the degree of lights in terms of how it's in the landscape. As I said, it cuts into the landscape towards the science park. So 4 of the first floor levels are subterranean on that side of the thing. On the motorway side, it would be entirely sort of open. And yeah, I didn't have a plan on the presentation for the car park. And in terms of lighting, again, I don't know if this is in relation to sort of light spills, the M4 motorway materials, but the national highways, as they were called Highways England before, they've assessed the application and they're satisfied with the approach. It does have a sort of some cladding on there, which will help shield the light spill out to the M4, and then it'll be sort of internally lit as a normal standard car park would. And again, probably like modern car parks, like the one down the new multi-storey in Wokingham Town Centre, they will may be sort of automatic lighting in terms of to save energy as well.
Thank you. Were you really interested in the height of the car park rather than the floor?
Sorry, that has answered my question satisfactorily. There was the question about the listed buildings.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I'll come back to you on that. In terms of listed buildings, as I said, we have requested that the sort of method of any pile foundations, which tends to be the most destructive thing and vibrating, causing method of construction, is done by pile auger, which is essentially a corkscrew going to the ground, lifting out the soil. And the other way of doing that is to physically bash the pile auger in with a sort of a hammer. So for that part of the site, they can only use that. But the construction team will have a duty of care for the listed building when constructing it. They may wish to do a pre-commencement survey on the building. That's entirely down to them.
Okay, thank you. And if it's all right, I'd like to ask the committee to consider the following issue. I've been alerted to a potential concern relating to heavy goods vehicle movements during the construction phase. This was raised with me by some early residents who are concerned that traffic currently sometimes diverts off the M4 onto Lower Early Way to avoid congestion on the M4. I'm wondering whether the committee would consider to protect the amenity of Lower Early, to minimise noise and traffic fumes and to reduce the risk of accidents and HGV vehicles damaging the road surface, whether a construction phase travel plan, just during the construction phase, be required or conditioned, aimed at keeping HGV construction vehicles off Lower Early Way and instead on the westbound M4.
No, that's a highway, isn't it? Not sure that's possible. One for Chris Easton.
Chris is there, but I can just jump in on that a little bit, I suppose. Chris can probably embellish. I've spoken to the applicant on this because they picked it up from a meeting they'd had with Lower Early Council. I mean, essentially, the Lower Early Way is a strategic route, and it is being built to be capable of handling HGVs. We are mindful of there are sensitivities around that by local residents. We can look as part of the construction environmental management plan to revisit that, and the applicant has agreed to do that. To primarily, we need to get the HGVs off the motorway, so the route might be from junction 11 down the Lower Early Way to the site that way in the main. But I think we need to allow them to have a secondary access point along the Lower Early Way, just in case there are issues elsewhere on the network. So I appreciate the point, but it has to be regarded that the Lower Early Way is an arterial route. I don't know if Chris has got anything else to say.
Can I just jump in there as well, please? One of the other things is clearly enforcement. How do you know what vehicles are going down Loreley Way? The Kemp will cover that, but delivery of materials is obviously subject to where they're coming from. So we will have a Kemp, we will control that to a point, but it is obviously very, very difficult, if not impossible, to enforce where they're coming from. So I think from a planning point of view, the Kemp is the best way to do it, because we can keep checks on them that way. But to say that no vehicles can use that, I don't think is reasonable. But Chris might jump in. I think he's just on now.
I think you might be having difficulty. I can't hear you, Chris.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I don't know what happened there. No, I think Chris and Connor kind of covered it. I think they've kind of covered it off. It is a very difficult one. It's also very hard as well. It's looking at the journey times. I can't see there's a massive improvement. Most HGVs, if they're already coming down the M4, will probably continue to junction 11. And obviously, we also need to be mindful that if the M4 is ever shut, that actually that is the alternative route that is used to take vehicles off at 10, bring them along Lower Early, Black Boy back down to junction 11. So it's a route that is acceptable to be used for HGVs. Clearly, obviously, it's not something that is that you probably want to have as your main route. There are a number of routes shown in the construction management plan, but that route is a legal highway. There's nothing that would prevent traffic from using it. But as I say, I think junction 11 would be the preferred route in any choice.
Could we consider maybe tweaking the CMP to encourage less use of the Lower Early Way?
Potentially. I mean, the Kemp, as far as I'm aware, is the same as the one that obviously was used for the temporary studios in terms of the routing that's used. But it's something we can take away and obviously speak to them once they've appointed their contractors to understand where they're potentially coming from, where the materials are coming from. But the plan is quite broad and general in terms of highlighting the key routes, the main routes. Obviously, that's quite typical to show the main routes. It's the smaller routes that clearly you don't want them to use. And Lower Early Way isn't really a small route as such, but we can have that conversation if that's what's wished.
Okay, Andrew, do you want to come back again?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I understood the officer's arguments and accept those, so would not be seeking to try to condition this. I think it would be good if it could be revisited, and if there were avenues for trying to alert HGV drivers and so forth about the potential dangers of using Lower Early Way. There's one junction in particular at the foot of Lower Meldreth Way, which has had a very unfortunate history of accidents. So yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew. Angus.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm first to thank everybody for a very full report, a very full presentation, and a fascinating and very useful site visit that we had on site, which I think gave a lot of questions, but also a lot of reassurances. I was slightly amused when doing a bit of research to see that part of what is being proposed to be built on is called Brown's Green. I can't recall in the dusk that we saw it whether it was brown or green at the time, but there's been reference to public rights of way, and I think probably outside of this application, I do hope that we can tidy up the formality of longer term stability of what happens along Cutbush Lane, especially as it goes past towards Lower Early Way and footpath 39. But I'm delighted at the improvements to footpath 4. One of the very late submissions, which is caught up with this thing of delaying the decision to the 18th of October, was from the fire service. And I know that Christopher is going to follow up about use of hydrants, but there was also a question about manoeuvring, which I'm sure and ask that he does answer the fire service just to reassure them about that point. One small question, did I understand from the presentation that application 212936, which was for the associated drainage, mostly off-site to take some of the water down to the Loddon, was passed yesterday?
Yes, that's correct. That was approved yesterday. The drainage ditch, which is essentially an enabling application, but it also help resolve some of the historic problems that we've had on Cutbush Lane with water coming off the M4 and Lower Early, and it tends to come down Pearman's Lane. So this will provide betterment for the studio site themselves and also for the British Museum site and other local users of the lane. On the fire service, I've just done a little bit more work on that, Councillor Ross, and it appears that there's about 20 metres of turning space between each stage building, so there should be sufficient space to incorporate that. But if I just share my screen now, just bear with me, just to cover this off and make sure it's all procedurally correct. I suggest that we impose a, sorry, I'll have to skip through them all very quickly. I suggest that we impose this condition, which basically states that that details of any fire hydrants, if they're required to overcome the lack of potential or perceived lack of turning space within the site from the fire service, should they be identified as being required in consultation with us and the Royal Berkshire Fire Service to serve development, they shall be required to be implemented and delivered prior to any first occupation of the building. So we will try and cover it off in that regard.
Yes, thank you for that. I think part of it, the fire service is concerned, maybe they're just taking delivery of a new aerial ladder platform, which enables them to go higher, but necessarily also is a longer vehicle in terms of manoeuvring. And thank you for the thing about drainage. My concern is that that hadn't been passed, what the later implication would have been, but you've reassured me. Thank you.
So is that another condition then, Chris?
The drainage will be covered by the Section 106 agreement to be implemented and installed before any after any earthworks have happened. So before any concrete's poured on site, effectively increasing surface runoff, that should be in place.
The consultation with the fire service.
Sorry.
Is that a further condition, consulting with the fire service?
Yes, that's the condition. Yeah. Angus had already told me that he'd be raising it, so I thought I'd pick it up when that got raised by Angus.
Thank you. Sam.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is with regard to some of your earlier slides in relation to the fire mitigation strategy. I see that there's quite a bit of cladding on the outside of these buildings, particularly in relation to sort of stage 1, workshop B, and some of the other sort of larger buildings. Can you just please confirm what's been done to ensure that any cladding use is of the sort of the most fire resistant type, and what mitigation strategy has been taken in place?
As far as I'm aware, this is solely for aesthetic purposes. So there's not a need to have insulation within that cladding. I'm sure cladding has been tightened up, but in any event, building regulations will cover this off. So they'll have to be approved by building regulations. It's a point of technicality that we are at the planning stage aren't involved in, but building regulations, they will have to get building regulations signed off. So it's not a planning matter.
Okay, thank you.
Bill.
Thank you, Chairman.
I was on the site visit, so if the question that I'm about to ask was answered on that site visit, I apologise. But I noticed on the illustration with the workshops, there's 2 workshops that have relatively tall chimneys, and I'm wondering what is expected to be emitted from these chimneys.
In terms of the emissions from them, I'm not entirely sure what would be emitted from them, but I think they are they would serve in terms of the heat recovery for the buildings. The buildings don't need to be heated themselves; they are ambiently heated. So I think it is to allow for any excess heat to be let out, generated.
They're not an extraction for any sort of cellulose, being in workshops or paint or anything like that.
No, they may be required in some instances for painting and stuff like that. There would be a lot of prop set up and things like that. So I think they are built in, but they will have to be controlled through environmental health. And the environmental health officer has assessed the application and raises no objections in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
Rochelle.
How many photovoltaic panels will be used by this building to help have some electricity? Next, will there be any greening of the car park? And lastly, will there be no gas at all used for heating? Now, obviously, with all the lights on, they're probably going to not need any heating, but can we make sure that there's no gas being used to heat the buildings as well for climate change purposes?
In terms of photovoltaic panels, I haven't got a figure off the top of my head, and they have committed to provide 20% of the requirements via PV panels, and they've got a good generator in terms of the top of the stage buildings and the workshop buildings. So there's plenty of room to accommodate these, and they have committed to that. For the gas, the applicant has confirmed in the briefing he gave us earlier that this will be gas free. There won't be any gas for it. And for landscaping is incorporated in the surface car park areas as advised in the presentation. So we've incorporated that where we can. Obviously, there's no significant landscaping for the deck car parking area, but there will be some low level trees around the site.
There has been greening of some car parks by having green plants on the outside of the car parks to help. And also, can we encourage them to increase the amount of solar power to have less problems with the grid locally?
In terms of the grid locally, they are working with the statutory undertaker in terms of getting the required amount of electricity to the site. That's an ongoing issue. In terms of, we have already pushed them in terms of the sustainable energy. Our benchmark is 10%. They came in at 15. I told them to get to 20, and they have got to 20, and I think that's commendable. And it's above our policy threshold. And returning to the greening of the car park, that could be potentially a good idea, but we have secured 10% off-site biodiversity net gain, which will be sustainable in the long term. Often these green walls, if they're not maintained properly, the plants just die. So this includes a comprehensive management plan for these spaces, and also we will get a clawback if if it's not met. But they have got a comprehensive strategy on parcels of land close to the River Loddon, which will help in terms of securing sustainable long-term biodiversity net gain.
Okay, Rochelle. Stephen.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, the other Chris, for such a full and very well balanced report. And a well-balanced report is very appropriate, in particular on this occasion, because it's a balanced decision. Obviously, we have some clear negatives about the application in terms of the encroachment on the countryside of part of the site. Obviously, we also have a less than ideal relationship with the heritage assets But we also have to consider on the other side very positive aspects of the application, and in particular the benefits that will come in terms of employment, education, the arts and culture. And I think the balance lies, in my mind, very clearly in favour of the positives rather than the negatives. So I will be supporting the application. I don't have any questions about the application as such, but I do have a question really about whether we might address the concern that Andrew was expressing about the impact on the low early way by means of an informative rather than a condition. Andrew has, I think, very wisely decided to drop the idea of a condition, given what has been told by the officers. But I wonder whether an informative indicating the committee's wish that the developer discourage construction traffic from using the low early way might help.
Is there a possibility, Chris?
I think the applicant has agreed to have a look at this once again in terms of the routing plan, and speaking to the team today on it, as it came up quite late again, they are willing to revisit that. The Kemp Construction Environmental Management Plan is a live document and it is open for review on various bases. I mean, my suggestion would be to have maybe the east of the lower early way as a secondary construction access point, and that can be updated in the plan, and the studio team will encourage their contractors to come through via that way. In essence, I mean, if I'm speaking from experience of moving heavy goods vehicles about, you generally go for the path of least resistance. So I would tend to go, if I was coming from the east, down the M4 to junction 11, and then come back to the site that way, because it's easier. It's an easier drive. There's less roundabouts. There's less gear changes. There's less everything else. But we can build that in, and yeah, we can do that, and we can impose the informative as well. So
Okay, we can minute what you said in the reply as well.
Well, I think I heard Chris correctly in saying that we could add the informative, and that would be helpful. So let's do that. If other colleagues are prepared to support that, I would like to propose it.
I'm seconded for the informative. Okay, we'll take a vote on that. Those in favour of the informative being added? Any against? I think that's unanimous. Thank you. I don't have any more speakers now. Carl.
So I thought I'd wait and see if everybody asked my questions, which is what usually happens, but they haven't this time. So thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Stephen on this. I mean, it's not a slam dunk decision, this, but it is a balance, because I mean, it is contrary to the development plan in several places. Half the site is on countryside, and the other half has got an outline permission for the phase 2 of the science park, which this would not fit. So obviously that's on one side of the balance. It's also loss of a natural site, and there is definitely some harm to listed buildings. I mean, it's been termed less than substantial, which is I accept, but that is still harm. I think we have to just note that at least. I was reading through some of the comments made online today, and there was quite a few complaining about the increase in traffic, and I accept that this will be less traffic use than if it had been come forward as a science park, and there's already outline permission for that effectively. So there's certainly no valid planning reason for us to discuss there. But I just want to make the point that local people certainly feel the weight of traffic around this location is already high, and it's a bit hidden by the events of the last 18 months. And my concern is for future development on top of this, which is certainly possible considering what we've heard. You know, I just think we're already at the limit for traffic there. We need to think a bit more constructively about how that's managed if we go forward with anything else in the future. The street lighting up to the up Cutbush Lane East, going up to the M4 bridge, I'd like to say thank you for that personally, because I'm definitely going to make use of that. I use that route all the time myself, and that ditch, I'm glad that, as Angus said, I'm glad that's gone through, because that bottom of that road is often waterlogged, lots of flooding there, so that was needed. And in fact, I noticed I had a look at the phase 2 of the science park application, and there was going to be a pond at the bottom of that road there, within the site, that obviously now is going to have a soundstage or parking built on it. So clearly there's a need for draining away a lot of water there. The major thing that weighs in its balance is the employment benefits. You know, we're talking about 3,000 jobs in perpetuity, effectively, with 3,000 on the construction. So very difficult to find things that stop that happening. But I do have some questions. Condition 36, I think it's now condition 35, which is about community engagement. I've read Appendix 4 to the planning statement, which is on community engagement, and it really looks good. And I just want to double check that this is linked to this application and this site. I'm thinking in terms of, you know, this is a piece of real estate, and while these applicants, to their credit, fully engaged in that, they could sell it to somebody who isn't. So I just want to make sure, I believe this is the case, that if the site is sold to someone else, that this is still a requirement. So that's the first question. I'll ask a couple because I've got quite a few. In terms of condition 3, talking about the use of the site, saying it shall be used only for activities in connection with production of media and filming activities, and other uses identified within the planning application. And this links into what Mr. Cockram said about the Office A. Are the offices solely related to the studios, or could they be rented out to other users? And of course, if so, I'm assuming they could only be related to filming and media uses. So I just want to, that's kind of 2 questions really. So I just want to clear that one up. I'll ask one more, and then I've got more after that, but I won't hit them all in one go. On page 23, condition 5 talks about hours of operation, and I'm assuming this is once the site is operational, it's not to do with the construction. It refers to no deliveries, loading or unloading between 1 AM and 6 AM, Monday to Sunday inclusive. And I'd just be interested to hear those hours explained, because they seem to be quite extreme. That we're talking about 6 AM on a Sunday morning being a valid time for outside work on site. Okay, I've got a few more questions, but I think I'll stop there so I can give a chance to answer.
Thanks, Carl. In terms of the condition 37, yes, if a site was sold on, it would be transferable to another operator because it's related to the planning permission. In terms of condition 3, the use captures all the site, so the office use should be used as a as linked to the filming production, and if it doesn't, then it will require a planning consent for a change of use to another form of offices. That'd be something we'd have to consider on its own merits at a later date, but on the face of the application, we need to consider what we have got on before us. And on condition 5, the deliveries, I mean, the film industry often need to set things up and take things away on and off site at short notice. The site is very well isolated here, and the access road into the site goes through the science park, away from residential properties, into the studios itself. So it is, I appreciate it is late, but given its sort of isolated nature, the disruption caused, and bearing in mind this area has background noise from the Eastern Relief Road and from the M4 motorway, would not, in our view, cause any significant harm to residents in the area.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's a good point about the M4. It's something I kind of forgot about, but I was thinking about it at one point. Right. Other points. On page 56, paragraph 46, it talks about a good landscaping buffer provided from the northern facility to Cutbush Lane East. Now, there's already, I think it's just outside the red line on the diagram, large area trees on the bit that goes up to the footbridge over the M4. And I'm just wondering whether that is basically going to stay as it is and be untouched. That's what it seems to be on the diagram, but I'd like to have that confirmed. Another quick question, which I think should be easy to answer. It also says in the report that the heights of the sound stages go up to 22.6 metres. And later on, it says these would sit on a 3-metre concrete plinth. Now, I'm assuming that 3 metres is included in that 22.6, but I'd just like that confirmed because it kind of reads both ways. And parking, this is kind of one of my ones I'm really interested in getting answered, really. The way the parking's been worked out, it seems to imply in the report, and this might be incorrect, it's not the way it's written, that parking modelling has been done using models of parking at other studios, as opposed to actual parking at other studios. And I just wanted to kind of understand a bit more about how that was worked out, particularly because the Science Park application, which I looked at, the outline one, which obviously now is going to be superseded if this goes ahead, talks a lot about parking, and I think even Reading Borough Council had an objection on that one, just to the level of parking involved. I'm just interested to know how we got those numbers, because obviously we have lots of studios in the southeast using parking, and we can pretty much gauge what we should be using. So I just want to hear how that happened. I've got one more question, which is page 68, paragraph 105 refers to bus services on Lower Early Way. Says they're a short walk away. I don't think they're a short walk away, but I'm just interested in what services they are.
Thanks again, Carl. In terms of the landscaping, this is subject to a condition, so we can have a look at further details around that area. It is well wooded at the moment, but agree we can look to see whether or not we can introduce a bit further landscaping around that area. So we'll pick up on that in terms of conditions discharge. There's a comprehensive landscaping condition set out in the report, which is let's go to it. Condition 26. So we can have a look at that and see if there's an opportunity to further strengthen that buffer. In terms of the 22.6 metre high stage, yes, that does include the plinth. So that's 22.6 included the concrete plinth, yeah, not 3 metres, and then 22.6 above it. So it's 22.6 metres in total in height, if that makes sense. And parking, Chris might come in and do a bit more on this, but what I understand is from the transport assessment is they've used the tricks, which I'm not sure of what that's short of off the top of my head, analysis for 5 other studio sites with similar links to public transport, and they have used that to base the parking numbers on there. And as I said, I think they've used the worst case scenario, but I'll let Chris answer that, and maybe the bus stop one as well.
Hello. Sorry. So in terms of the car parking, Chris is broadly correct. So like they did with the temporary studios, they had a look at a couple of, because the council doesn't have, as Chris mentioned in his report earlier, the council doesn't have a parking standard for film studios. It's not a common land use that we've been used to, and wasn't obviously something that was envisaged when we updated our parking standards back at the last local plan. So moving forward here, we've got a couple of examples that have been used. So what we normally do is something like that, or with a type of sui generis use that we haven't used, we asked the developer to go away and find some examples. So that's what they did in this instance. They went off, found some examples, one being obviously Pinewood and Shepperton, which are kind of similar scale and size. Shepperton actually has been had Tricks, which is an industry used tool which surveys development sites, looks at trip rates, trip distribution, and parking levels. And so obviously not only have they provided the calculations from those development sites, but have also got Tricks secured information that is, as I say, an industry used tool used by over 600 companies and local authorities across the country. And it came out with a parking standard based on kind of the 100 square meters that we would normally break it down to, and it calculated in at just over 1,000. So I think it's about 1,063, 65, something like that. I think it reported. But what they did is they based it on the worst case assessment, and that came in at 1,375 spaces. So if anything, there is an over provision of parking in this location, which I think would provide the comfort that obviously if there is any fluctuation in those, because we don't have a fixed standard, This is the worst case and the highest provision. In there is 79 disabled parking bays, 155, I think they are electric, so some are passive and some are in. And that's basically where that calculation come from. In terms of the bus, I'm going to have to look up that number. I don't have that detail of what service runs past, but in terms of there's two facilities, so it's not just Lower Early Way. Lower Early Way does have a bus service. I'll have to look and we'll find out that one for you. But in terms of the main bus service is the public transport strategy that was secured as part of the wider South of the M4 SDL, and that runs and provides a facility that comes in and out of Reading, obviously past the park and ride at Mere Oak into Reading off Basingstoke Road, and then obviously back around through the university and loops back round to the development in south of the M4 and back up through the A327 to Reading in that route. And that bus, as Chris mentioned and showed in the presentation earlier, does actually enter into the science park and turns around and carries on through the housing estates and so on and so forth. So there is pretty good public transport accessibility already, and the Lower Early Way is just an added one. If someone else was travelling to a different location, it is within an acceptable walking route if someone wished to head to that service.
Yep, fair enough. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's one of the little oranges buses. I do know where they go. They're not actually on Lower Early Way. They run on it and then they go off it, and that's where the stop is. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, and I think the bus service setup does seem to be quite good. Although I'll just leave you with this one comment, which is not necessarily for you, but Pinewood has a free shuttle bus service to local stations. So that might be something that the operators want to think about in the future in terms of a better system. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Anybody else wishing to speak? Does anyone have an alternative proposal to make? In the absence of that, we go to the recommendation. There's rather a lot of condition changes in the members' update. The fire service consultation condition, where is that, Chris? Is that a new number? What number is it?
Apologies, that was today. We've had a couple of issues. Just bear with me. It'll have to be condition one report. I think it's 42 now. Sorry, just scrambling to find the relevant section. That'll be 43 if minded to apply that as well.
Yes, but we voted for that, so we are applying that. So the conditions in the supplementary planning agenda are 3, 7, 16, 17, 34, 36, 39 and 43. There's also the referral to the Secretary of State. Is that voluntary? This is because we're not strictly in policy here. Reason?
It's not according to our solicitor. He's had a look at this. We don't strictly have to submit to the Secretary of State, but given that there is sort of policy conflict here, and it's probably best to, in terms of from a challenge point of view, just to refer it and go down that process. So it doesn't meet any of their strict criteria, but it's something maybe to be mindful, just to tick that off in terms of from a challenge point of view.
Okay, so that's an amendment to recommendation A.
Yeah.
And then there's the question of the still accepting comments till Monday. And that is added to the recommendation as well, is it?
That was added to recommendation as well. Yeah, which wasn't on the update, but again, as something that cropped up today.
Okay, are members clear what we're voting for here? Yes, the informative. Sorry, Steve. The informative as well. We need to. We have already approved that. So if members are happy, we'll go to the recommendation.
Chairman, could we just have some idea of the likely delay if this does go to the Secretary of State to get formal approval?
Roughly, I think, Connor might step in, but I think it's generally around about up to 6 weeks, but generally something like this, they'll probably get through because it's employment and COVID recovery within a shorter period of time. Probably likely 3 weeks, which gives us time to firm up the Section 106 agreement in the meantime.
Okay, Rochelle?
I've never heard of an approved application going to the planning authority or going to anybody else other than judicial review to have it overturned. So I'm not quite sure why we're going to the Secretary of State in this particular case. It just doesn't seem much sense. If we didn't approve it, that's another story. But if we are approving it, it doesn't make much sense.
It's a process, Rochelle. So given the scale and the complexity of it and the fact we are, oh, can you hear me? Sorry, I'm not sure if it's working. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Connor.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, sorry about that. Yeah, so given the scale and the complexity of the application, and there is a departure from policy, so it's in the countryside, and also the science park. It's just a matter of going to Secretary of State. They do call schemes in quite often, but I suppose it's a safety check for us that they're happy with it, and they can call it. But I wouldn't expect them to object to your decision, your resolution.
Thank you, Connor. Okay, Rochelle. So if you go to the recommendation on page 21, if everyone's happy what we're voting for and the including informative, if I see those in favour of voting for recommendations A, B and C. Thank you very much. I think it's unanimous. Thank you. And we move on to page 25, which is application 211-530. London Shidfield West. Simon Taylor, good evening.
Thank you, Chair. The application 211530 is the 6th reserved matters application for the outline permission 2010/1432, which is for a residential development for up to 1,200 dwellings, along with specialist housing, local centre, including a food store, retail and office floor space, community centre, along with 2 primary schools, open space and sang. More than 1,000 dwellings have been delivered thus far, and this application involves one of the last pockets of residential accommodation and works in and around the town square. The existing village of Shinfield is on the right-hand side of this screen. The development on the left side has mostly been delivered in recent months. The area that we're dealing with here is land off the roundabout running through the site, outlined by the red line plan. The application as amended involves 25 dwellings in 19 houses and 6 flats, the flat building being here and the houses on the western part of the site, and 160 square metres of retail floor space adjacent to the flat building. The plans reference a little supermarket, but this will come forward in a future reserved matters application, so it's not part of this application. Associated infrastructure includes a through road with a cycle path along its northern side. The removal of a bus gate that was originally at either end of the road, imposed at outline permission stage. Hard and soft landscaping in and around a town square, which is concentrated in either side, alongside the Little's store, the retail space and the community centre that's already to the south of the site. 6 affordable units are proposed within the flat building. Objections were received from 3 residents, with an objection from Shinfield Parish Council as well. The primary concerns are the lack of and substandard retail floor space and the town square, which is contrary to the original development brief, a lack of soft landscaping and increased traffic arising from the removal of the bus gate. There are no objections from Council's Highways Officer, Ecology Officer, Landscape Officer, Drainage Officer or Rights of Way Officer. The Housing Officer raised reservations with the provision of affordable housing in the flat building as it's contrary to the approved conditional approval, which was meant to be provided in houses across the entire SDL. Vivid, which is the housing provider, have indicated that they support the delivery of affordable housing in the flat building. And on that basis, the council's not opposing that delivery in that area. There's also it's below policy compliance, but it is in excess of what is required of 35% across the entire outline approval site. The residential component accords with the guidelines in the development plan. You'll see elevation through the residential area there with the flat building and the indicative plan of the little supermarket at the end there. The removal of the bus gate limited, there's sufficient internal and external amenity space. The dwellings are complemented with sufficient on-street and off-street car parking and a surplus of electric vehicle charging points, 23 in total, or 40% of the total provision. The highways officer is satisfied with the road layout. Refuse vehicles are accommodated. The removal of the bus gate was initially intended to limit through traffic to buses only, but it was removed in order to provide better resilience around the wider network. To ameliorate any perception of increased traffic through the site, which is used to access the future car park for Lidl, the road surface, you'll note here, is surfaced in a way that's not dissimilar to the Wokingham town centre, which is intended to slow the traffic. The other points worth noting is the town square and the retail floor space fall below what was envisaged in the development brief, but in both respects, it has been 10 years since the delivery of the outline approval. The town square still achieves its intended purpose as being a pedestrian focus, and it's complemented by the footpaths around the area, the retail floor space and the public right-of-way through the site. Importantly, condition 5 requires a public art strategy to be implemented, and that's intended to be implemented in and around the town square. Conditions include compliance with the EV strategy, delivery of the public art and details relating to disabled access. The members' update proposes amendments to conditions because of duplication of the outline approval that was unintended, or because of the level of detail that was submitted. I'll just quickly run through the photos at the moment. You've got the community centre there, the site in the foreground, the public right-of-way running through the site. The supermarket would be within the centre of this site here. They're existing specialist housing, aged care in the background there with the site in the front. And that's looking east, looking from the western part of the site, looking back towards Shinfield itself. Most of the site is a site compound at the moment, so there's not much landscaping or ecological benefit on the site at present. And this here is the through road that links up to the roundabout on in Shinfield. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. We have one speaker, Nick Patterson-Neil, who's still here. 3 minutes, Mr. Patterson-Neil.
Good evening, Chairman and members. Thank you. My name is Nick Patterson-Neil, Planning Partner at Barton Wilmore, and I speak on behalf of the consortium, Bloor Homes, Southern and Vistry Group. The consortium is delighted that this reserve matters application for 25 homes and 134 square metres of retail floor space is due to be considered by members this evening with an officer recommendation for approval. The application, as you know, forms part of the local centre within the SDL in Shinfield, which was granted outline planning permission in 2012 for up to 1,200 homes supporting uses, and this application represents one of the final phases of this important development. The local centre has a community focus, and this has been positively shaped through pre-application and public consultation processes and is in accordance with the approved local centre development brief. The scale, type, density of the development is appropriate and will provide for a vibrant and attractive local centre, complementing the approved community building and care home, which you just saw in the photographs currently either under construction or provided. The consortium is working very closely with the potential food store operator, that's Lidl, to deliver the food store. And the proposals have been carefully planned and amended following discussion with officers to ensure that the operator and its future delivery is not compromised. We've worked very positively and proactively with your officers, resulting in a high quality policy compliant development, which will deliver the following key benefits: 25 affordable homes, including 6 affordable units. And that's an over provision of affordable homes when considered across the allocation and the site as a whole. Flexible retail space to meet local needs. A public plaza as has been mentioned by the officer, that prioritises pedestrians through careful use of materials and design, high quality landscape and green infrastructure, energy demand reduction through a fabric first approach, and an over provision of 8 passive electric charging points. So overall there's 19 passive and 4 active across the site. And there is sufficient space to incorporate the food store, as I mentioned, in the future, which the consortium is working closely with a supportive operator to facilitate. So the site benefits from no technical objections from your officers or statutory consultees. And finally, it's considered that this site is an extremely sustainable location, an important part of the Shinfield West development, and I fully support the officer's recommendation in favour of the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, Rochelle.
Okay, a few questions. Will it be 10% photovoltaic power for this place, since that seems to be the penurious level of PV that we seem to request? Good luck about the food store. Arborfield still doesn't have one, to the best of my knowledge, and it's unlikely that they'll get any either. Are the charging points upgradable to any new standard that will be brought in sometime in the future? There are proposals that can increase charging to a much quicker rate within about 5 to 10 years. So we need to have the ability to be able to upgrade them. That's what I'm starting with, at least.
I'm just want to come in.
I'm told that the food store application is imminent, so it should be submitted in the next few weeks, I think. So it was hoped that it would be forming part of this application, but I don't think there's any doubt that it'll be delivered very shortly. I don't have an exact answer for the upgrading facility of the EV charging. It is the delivery of the housing will be in the next few years, so it would be envisaged that they would accommodate the most up-to-date and charging facilities. But beyond that, I don't have a specific answer for you. There is a EV charging strategy that forms condition 4, and that could be amended if it needed to be.
Did I get it? Sorry, 10% photovoltaic panels requirement. Is that going to be enforced? And if not, why not?
Sorry, I missed that one. They've submitted an energy report, so it meets policy compliance. Unfortunately, policy hasn't caught up with current status. So beyond that, there's nothing that council can do to enforce anything beyond the 10%. So in terms of providing 10% solar panels, I'm not aware of that, no.
Sorry, we were just told in the previous application that there was a requirement for 10% photovoltaic panels. So is that true or not true? And if it is true, why don't we have it here?
Rochelle, sorry, I'll just jump in for a little bit of background. So this scheme, the outline of this scheme was approved back in 2012. The council's policy on sustainables was post that date. So there is no requirement for the 10% on this site. However, the council works with a fabric first approach, which you've probably heard many times. In essence, what it is aiming to achieve is sustainable buildings where you have, as opposed to having solar panels, you stop them from having to use so much carbon and heating and those things. So it is in accordance with our policy that was adopted at the time. As I say, this is a reserve matters, so we are doing the best we can. Building regs also captures buildings as well, and building regs are due to change shortly. So by the time this is built, it may even be caught by the new building regs.
So building regs are always up to date, but as this is a reserve matters, we can't consider the electric points because that was part of the outline approval.
Could we add an informative to encourage them to put some photovoltaic panels on their new development? It's an informative, it's not a requirement, but if they don't do it, we'll know they haven't and they don't believe in it.
Well, I think we'll be able to see in any case because they're pretty obvious most cases. I mean, building regs. The reality is building regs is where the sustainable measures are and moving in the future outside of planning because it's better suited to that form of regulation.
Okay, right. Carl.
Thank you, Chair. I've only got two questions, but they're kind of important ones, I think. I've heard some discussion about it, but I'll say it straight. Why are the bus gates being removed? I'm asking this on the basis that Shinfield objected to that, saying, it was on page 199, it is paramount that Beak Avenue does not become another arterial route for traffic. And it would appear from the, I think it's a members update, they've objected again on the same basis. They don't like this idea. So I'm just interested to know the explanations, both in the report and what I've heard tonight, seem to be that it should become an arterial route for traffic. So they think not, you think they should. So I'm just interested to know what's going on there. Why were they considered in the first place and now they're not?
Evening. Carl, this was a historic one actually, that the bus gate was kind of included when this application was initially considered back in 2010, I think it was now, to be fair. And obviously it has been a subsequent conversation since. Bus gates are always a hard one to kind of police. And in this location, I mean, as you can see from the layout, I don't know if you recall seeing it on the slide earlier that Simon showed, where the housing is located, you are going to have traffic coming in and out, obviously from the roundabout serving the store in the future, as well as obviously having houses being served from the other side of the potential bus gate that would be. So there's always going to be traffic in this location, regardless of whether it being through traffic or whether it's just turning and terminating. So as I say, they had a look at it. It's been calculated. We've rerun the model to see. There was always some questions around whether the bus gate was necessary originally, because obviously when the store was first shown, you would have people wanting to drive to the store from within the site to do a shop. It is a shop that you can easily do a weekly shop on, and those vehicles would need to exit the site onto the highway network and come back into the site via obviously the alternative access to get to the store. That isn't the sole reason why it's been considered. It's just deemed that there is no significant benefit in it being there. It's very hard to police, and obviously the build outs and designs that were just didn't serve any great purpose for that to be there. And yeah, network resilience is not a bad thing to have. 3 points of access to a development site that serves approximately 900 houses, if I recall correctly, is not really one that we have a problem with. And say in terms of traffic, it doesn't show to have any great deals of issues. And I guess one other thing, it would help with obviously the viability of the store, as people can access it easily from within the development rather than say driving out, which they then might look to go somewhere else. That's broadly where the decisions come from.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. I think it could still be a problem. I think just the fact that it's been paved a bit different on the road doesn't mean that there's going to be a lot of traffic flying down there, which is not great through what's termed throughout a square, but it looks more like a very long rectangle to me. But anyway, my other question. Why affordable flats and not houses? It's discussed in the report that that was originally not a good idea, but then after discussions, it says that changed. So why has that changed? And also, where is the amenity space for the flats? It's referred to in the report, but I can't quite see it on the diagram on the map.
So again, the original delivery of affordable housing was from 2010. It was amended in 2015 to incorporate just houses. So it has been 6 years since. So again, delivery of affordable housing changes over time. So Vivid, who have been engaged as the registered provider for this site, have indicated their desire to deliver the affordable housing in the flats. So the council's not in a position to oppose that. It is also allows a bit of a mix affordable housing across the wider delivery of 1,200 units. So up to now, it's only been in houses. So revision of units is not a major concern in that respect. The amenity space is to the north of the site, so it's in behind the building. That's intended to be used adjacent to the car park. That's the extent of the amenity space for those units. Yes.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought, and that's worrying for me. I mean, you know, this is Shinfield. It's not the centre of a large town, you know, like Wokingham or Reading, where you've got, yeah, platted development would be kind of more useful in terms of, you know, there's lots of other options for providing amenity, but this is just one what looks like it's not even fully grassed. It looks mostly like it's hard standing next to a car park, and it'll be hemmed in by the fact of the 3-storey building for the flats. And also, if the food store comes along, that food store running along the side of it. So, you know, I don't think this design is kind of acceptable in that location, really. Personally, it just doesn't look good to me.
I think if you look at the floor layout of the flat building, they're dual aspect. They've got a good southerly aspect. They've got Juliet balconies, so the internal amenity afforded to the units is very good. So. That probably reduces the necessity for communal outdoor ground level space, which it's not policy departure, so it's only a guideline.
Yeah, I'll recognise that it's just a guideline. I will say that, you know, the last 18 months has taught us that, you know, we all and the market is telling us that people want more space, so we should be looking to do that, I think. But I'll take your point.
Isn't that a normal policy to mix the affordable housing with the other housing throughout the site? The reason this the affordable housing is all together, is that because it's 2010 outline, which is somehow
no, well, there is sorry, Chris, there is affordable housing throughout the rest of the development. Normally the housing is put together just for management issues. So you don't want to say a block of flats or apartments or whatever you want to call them with a mix of units, because it's actually really hard to manage for the affordable housing company. So that's why they like them in one block, basically. But there is a mix throughout the whole development site, the whole 2,000 or over 2,000 units.
Okay, thanks. Steve.
Thank you very much, Chris. My question is on a slightly different matter. It's the extent of retail provision, which seems to have come down very substantially from what was originally envisaged. And I'm just wondering why that is the case, simply to end up with one retail unit, plus the prospect of obviously a large supermarket coming along soon, seems strange for what's conceived as a centre, just to have one retail unit space. And I would like better to understand why that's the case.
Again, I'll jump in here. So we've done a lot of work with the developers on this. We're safeguarding, so you may be aware, but the application came in originally had houses either side of the supermarket. We have asked them to remove them because we're safeguarding the site for Lidl. So in essence, looking at the markets, this was all designed up over 10 years ago. The market has changed massively. We felt that looking at the market research and case studies in other places, that actually one retail unit with the supermarket itself is a much better fit, because there is actually existing retail around there. There's a garage shop that's quite popular. You've obviously got the community building that's opposite, which will probably have a cafe coming forward. So you're in a position that by having too many, all that happens is they market it, it doesn't get filled, and it becomes residential. So it's better to aim at a level that we know that we can fill. And I think the one retail shop, once you have a supermarket next to any shops, it generally is a problem, because they sell lots of things and they can undercut all the smaller shops. So by having one retail unit, it's more successful. There is a fair amount of retail units around there, local shops in the area. So yeah, that's where we've got to. In terms of the supermarket size, it's so they're based on what the current demand is. So the Lidl and the Aldis of this world, they have a standard store format. It's slightly below what was agreed in the design brief for the site. I think it was 2,500 square meters for that. They're just about 2,300, 2,250. So they're slightly below, but they just have a standard format, as you're probably aware from going into them. They don't change anywhere. So Lidl are the operators. We have been in contact with Lidl. We've been talking with them. But in any case, we've safeguarded the site that if they didn't come forward, there is enough land to accommodate the supermarket. So that's really where we've got to. I think if you look at a lot of the SDLs, what you'll find is actually the amount that was originally proposed in terms of retail in most of the areas, Arborfield included, North Woking, it has reduced, and it's just because the way the world works has changed from when the SPDs and the policies were adopted. So we prefer to secure the units we can, as opposed to have vacant units for a year or 2 years and then they become residential. So that's really why we've got to this stage. But we have looked at it, and we've been very strict on them, because originally what they wanted was a small co-op on the site, and we've basically said not a chance, and they had to come back. So that's why we safeguarded the supermarket and why Lidl are involved.
Thank you, Connor. That's helpful. Although obviously, the fewer units you have on the site, the more likely you are to have people driving around. But I suppose we can't avoid that.
Andrew.
Yes, thank you very much, Simon and Chris. The imminent food store application has been mentioned a number of times tonight, and in fact, I think it was Simon who said that it was hoped that application for the food store might be part of this application as well. I'm just curious as to why the two are not being considered together, as the two developments really do seem to be very closely linked. There's already been reference tonight, for example, to the removal of the bus gate, quote from some of the public documents here, to help with the viability of the future food store. And clearly the should the food store get approved in future, it will have implications for the functioning, of this particular section of the site. So I'm a bit uneasy about approving aspects of this development, not knowing exactly all the issues involved with the food store. And just picking up also on this issue of retail, it said in the members' update, there's a change in the members' update to the conditions about about retail use and so forth. I'm just curious as to what officers envisage this retail use might include. Does it, for example, include food takeaways? There was a reference to a moment ago, a discarded proposal for a small co-op, for example. The reason why I'm curious about this is that clearly the existence of a large food store nearby will have implications, positive and negative, for the future retail use. And I'm just wanting clarification as to actually what that might involve, whether should the retail space not be taken up at some point in the future, whether there would be opportunities for an application to change the land use, including back to residential. They're my first two questions. They're my first two linked questions. It's about the rationale for not considering the food store application as part of this, and secondly, questions relating to the proposed retail unit.
The residential component was ready to come forward, so that was submitted. The Lidl supermarket wasn't ready. It required further negotiations between the developer and Lidl before it was ready in terms of floor layout and everything else that came with it. So that's the primary reason why it was delivered. We can't force them to submit them as one application, reserve matters application. In terms of the retail floor space, it's conditioned in the outline approval. So it's A1 to A5 under the old use class order, which effectively allows anything from not standard retail through to drinking establishments and takeaway and hot food cafe. So there's an inability to restrict it any further, given it's already got approval for that use. Any future change of use would be contrary to that condition, and so would require a new application for it to be converted to anything other than retail.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying the issue with regards to retail use. That's very, very useful. I'd like to ask a couple of other questions. I was really pleased to see condition 5, which refers to the public art strategy. This is on page 128. I note there's an amendment, slight amendment to this in the members' update. As I say, I'm very, very, very pleased to see this condition in there, but I still feel that it perhaps still lacks sufficient detail. For instance, for this to be really meaningful, surely there needs to be some sort of information about indicative costs rather than just, a statement that there will be an installation, and also perhaps more clarity about who's going to be responsible for maintaining, the installation or installations, over hopefully a very, very long period of time. I was also really pleased to see in condition 7 a reference to accessibility. There is a little bit of potential sort of misunderstanding, or maybe it's the way I've read it. On page 150, there's a reference to at least 5 units, being accessible. And then on page 129 is a reference to 4 such units. But my question is, my more substantive question about this is, what guarantees are there that this accessibility will be maintained throughout the lifetime of the development? In other words, that it can't be designed away at some point in the future. For instance, by planning applications, maybe to extend, a property or convert properties in some way. So, yeah, welcome the public art strategy, welcome the conditions there about accessibility, but just a little bit more information, please.
The public art is envisaged in the SPD for the sites of the master plan, but it wasn't included in the outline application. So the applicant has agreed for its inclusion here, but the details with that would only come forward with the permission. So nothing's been commissioned at all. So there's no details that we could really run with at the present time in terms of costs or what kind of installation that will be worked out down the track. In terms of accessibility, the intent is to ensure that the dwellings are adaptable to M42 standards, so that would allow it to be used as an accessible dwelling in the future. It's not necessarily asking for the units to be designed to be accessible, which would be a lot more prohibitive in terms of providing stair lifts and everything else. But as long as they're adaptable, then their future use is effectively guaranteed for disabled persons. In this case, it includes dwellings and the retail use and disabled parking. That's the intent behind the condition.
Okay, thanks for clarifying those issues. I do, as a layperson, of course, I do still think there is a difference between, on my understanding at least, between something being accessible for persons with disabilities and adaptable, and I'd obviously read this in a slightly different manner. I do have two other questions, and they both relate to parking and vehicle movements. The parking for the retail unit, it says that it's on-street parking opposite the future food store. As Carla's raised some concerns, which I share, about amenity space for the flats in that area. How would this on-street parking actually relate to the amenity space, given some of the concerns also that have already been raised on this? How many on-street spaces are provided? How's that need determined? Given, I assume that that's likely to depend in part on the final type of retail. And my reason for asking this is because I'm worried that residents in the flats may not be able to find sufficient parking spaces due to competition from the retail users and potentially from users of the village square and the community building and so forth. I want to feel confident that the residents of the flats will actually have sufficient, hopefully allocated parking spaces. And finally, on vehicle and pedestrian movements, can you just talk us through the shared section of the roadway through the local centre? You mentioned the kind of paving that's envisaged and so forth, but I am concerned. I'd like to know a bit more about some of the safety measures that would be in place, for example, to accommodate visually impaired persons or young children visiting the site. And I am concerned. It is an area that I know reasonably well, and I am concerned, or I'd like reassurances, if that's possible, that this is unlikely to become a future rat run, particularly through the village square.
Hi. So the parking complies with the council's current parking standards. So in terms of the flats, they are kind of self-sufficient, standalone, and they meet the standards. There is a series of 47 allocated across the site, and 5 visitor parking bays, and some unallocated. I can't recall, just need to quickly see here the provision of the split, but my understanding is each 47. Yeah, so there is allocated provision as well for the flats area of the parking court to the rear. So in terms of the parking, it meets the council standards, and we can't obviously, I understand what you're saying, but obviously there is an acceptable provision that's been provided. In relation to the square, if that's what it's being called, in terms of the materials, we'll obviously get down to that part where we get to the detail, but in terms of the way you move through it, it will be designed as such to have basically to reduce the movement of vehicles through it. There will be slow moving vehicles, and I don't know if Simon, could you perhaps share the plan of it was probably easier to kind of speak to it than it is to kind of try to describe it, but of the local centre or the development itself that's being proposed.
Sorry, which plan were you after?
I think you've got, just if you go slightly further on through, there was one. No, I mean that one would do. That one there should suffice. But go back to the next one. Yeah, that's a bit easier to see. So you can see obviously the material choice that's obviously gone through this location, and so it just shows there's a kind of a change in character. There is a change in the materials, and obviously there is a footpath cycleway that runs obviously through. You've got the connections. It is going to be kind of it is a little hub area. So obviously to the south of where the store is showing, you've got the entrance to the medical centre, which obviously exists. You've got the car park and the the new community centre, which has been constructed over to the east, and then obviously the housing proportion obviously to the west. And obviously there are 2 bus stops located in here as well along that route, and then you can see the crossings. So in terms of the crossings, there's a few crossing locations. There's 4 in total, 3 shown through the paved area, and then obviously another one shown slightly further out to the west. And they all do. They will comply and have tactile paving and corduroy paving in the areas that define what should be for cycles and what should be for pedestrians. And as always, it will need to comply with highway standards, and obviously will be road safety audited by an independent auditor prior to opening as well, and will go through various assessments and technical sign-offs by the council's officers before and during construction. And that will be party to a Section 38 agreement that will need to be concluded to deliver this. Is there any other questions I missed on there?
Angus.
Thank you, Chairman. One comment and one question. I find it slightly incongruous that we're talking in some places in the report and elsewhere about a town square with 1 shop. My question, quite separate to that, is on page 169, talking about refuse strategy layout. It does seem that a number of the residential units will have to take their refuse quite some way to the collection point, and I just asked whether that was fully considered.
Yes, it has. I'm just bringing up the refuse plan because I'm not sure whether it was included in the suite of plans that I included in this.
Yes, it's page 169.
Like it is. Is there a specific part of the site? Because my understanding is they're all within close proximity. So there's curbside collection along the through road, and then there's a couple of sites at the rear which collect to a central point, and then the area around behind the flat building and opposite plots 15, 16, there's refuse can turn around there, so there's collection around that point as well. So my understanding is that there's no actual requirement for them to have to walk further than the standard, which I think is 50 metres or 40 metres off the top of my head.
Personally, I would question that, but also if the bin collection point, which is, as it were, nearest to the store, big blue blob, is going to be the place for a large number of dwellings to take their rubbish to. That's going to be sitting outside somebody's dwelling. Has that been considered?
The location of it's been considered in proximity to the residence, yes.
And found acceptable?
Yes.
I seriously question that, and I don't know what we can do about it at this stage, but it does seem to me that one, too many people have got to travel some distance with their refuse, and 2, the collection points are not sufficient to satisfactorily provide, without intrusion on people, a place where all the refuse is gathered before collection.
Angus, just referring to the plan that you're referring to on page 169. So you'll see that the 2 blue locations showing the bin collection area, that is only served by the blue dotted lines that go to it. So basically the refuse truck would just reverse into that kind of turning head area, and then that brings that within the walking distance to the blue dotted area, to the blue large dot. The green dots indicate locations where each of the properties will be served. So you're only talking 4 to 5 4, 5 or 6 properties located in that blue area. The purple area or the fuchsia area, that is obviously a bin collection area for the flats. And then again, all the rest of the green dots, they'll all be served from the front. And then in the second road, again, you've got that blue location, which is then only served by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 to 6 properties at best. And even then, one of the properties of that 5 can probably be collected from the front with another green dot, or even actually 2 of those properties could probably be collected by, and that's probably what will happen in reality. So that blue location on the secondary road will probably only serve 3 properties, 2 or 3 properties to the rear. So that's how it might look slightly convoluted, but obviously all the dots all over the plan. But that's what it's showing. It's showing that the bin store, the bin drivers and collectors may obviously in fact just walk slightly further, but that's just the designated area to show that that's the walking distance that the truck can go where the light blue dotted line is, and it will walk to collect from those 2 blue dots and then all the green dots and the fuchsia dots, and that shows the kind of the collection point for that whole parcel.
Thank you, Chris. I now better understand the plan and feel more relieved.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Nobody else wishes to speak. And an alternative proposal, next to the recommendation. I can find it. Page 1 to 6. There are quite a lot of amendments in the supplementary planning agenda on pages 8 through to 11. Is that clear what we're voting on? If it is, can I see those in favour of approving this application, please? Okay. It's 5 in favour. Those against? 1. And 3 abstentions, I think. Yep. Okay, so that application is approved. Thank you. Moving on to the next one, maybe we can get through this one quite quickly. On page 201, this is 212-228, which is Lambs Lane Primary School, and the case officer is Adriana Gonzalez. Good evening, Adriana.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Can you see the screen?
Can you blow it up, please, as it were?
So this is plan application 212228 for the retention of an existing modular building for a temporary period of 7 years to serve Lambs Lane Primary School in Spencer's Wood. The school is split with the school buildings and playground to the north of Back Lane and the grass playing field and the parking facilities, including the drop zone to the south of the lane. The modular building is located on the main playing ground and is accessed via ramp and step arrangement. It was granted temporary permission in 2010, and following expiration of that permission, it is requested the building is retained for a further temporary period of 7 years, as this is the time of it takes for primary pupils to pass through the school from year reception to year 6. This is a floor plan, the existing floor plan showing the 2 classrooms and toilet facilities. There are no changes or alterations proposed. These are the existing elevations, again, with no changes proposed to the external appearance. This is the modular building view from Back Lane. It is considered acceptable without any detriment to local character or neighboring amenity. The building remains a key asset for the school function as a designated resource space, providing education for children with high levels of special education needs. Subject to the conditions as set out in the report, the application is considered to accord with local and national policies, and it's therefore recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Adriana. No speakers. Members?
Bill. Thank you. It's just a procedural thing. This is a retrospective application. It was due to be reviewed in 2018. Sorry, 2000 and yes, it came to its end in 2018. How did it manage to get another 3 years without coming back to us before? I mean, it's our property. And secondly, if it was a term of 7 years the first time and 7 years the second time, we're looking at 14 years. This should be up for looking at again in 2025. Is that the case? Or are we saying that we start again now with the 7 years and making it 2028? And it seems rather strange to me that you can benefit by what I would consider an error in actually not bringing this to us before. Adriana?
Yes, I don't know the details, to be fair, of why it hasn't come to up to speed with the new permission up until now. But the request for the 7 years, further 7 years, would be from the date of the decision if it gets approved today at committee, and not backwards.
It seems to me that we're adding another 3 years to the potential life of this building. Are we sure that it's meeting the standards and will be meeting the standards in 2028?
The further 7 years would allow for any assessment on the maintenance or the standard of the building. So yeah, I don't know if Justin wants to add anything.
Thanks, Adriana. I will just quickly. I think, Bill, that's exactly why we're proposing a further 7 years. I think 7 years is a reasonable amount of time to assess whether or not it meets future standards and how it's weathered over that period of time. As you can see, it's been there for a few years, and we wouldn't necessarily want to give it a permanent permission, but there has to be some sort of balance, and 7 years seems reasonable to officers.
Okay, thank you. Steve.
Thank you, Chris. I was going to make a very similar point to Bill's. It's slightly embarrassing that the applicant, which is the council, seems to have been 3, possibly 4 years late in submitting an application. Obviously, one of the advantages, if we can put it that way, of a retrospective application is we can see what we're supposed to be approving. It's already there. I don't have any objections to the application, but I'd be grateful if Adriana could perhaps pass on to the applicant our concern that it's taken rather a long time for this to come before us, and we hope that would not happen again.
I'm sure she will do that. Carl?
Yeah, we'll do.
Yeah. Carl?
Thank you. Yeah, totally agree with Councillor Simon. Very good point, reiterated by Stephen. And that was question number 1 on my list as well. Just interested, this is just a comment really. I could ask you a question on it, but it's not really one for you to answer, Adriana. So it says on page 207, paragraph 9, it would not be acceptable for this type of structure to be retained permanently, which I think Justin's just reiterated, which I agree with. And I'm just thinking, you know, if this is the kind of building that we're not going to retain permanently, and is also referred in this report as a key asset that is needed on a, and I quote, a permanent basis, why has it not been replaced with something suitable in the last 10 years? And why is it okay to carry on for another 7 years? You know, we need to be replacing these buildings properly. And I think 10 years is long enough, and certainly 17 years is. So I won't see this back here again, but I hope this planning committee won't either.
Rochelle.
As a governor in a school that has 2 of these outbuildings like that, the reason that they haven't been replaced is there's no money from the council to actually replace them, and we need them for students, and that's approximately what's happening. I don't know how. I wonder how old some of the things at Bearwood Primary are, and how long whether they've actually approved it. Also, I may ask the head of the school tomorrow. to find out. But they've been sitting there for at least 10 years in each of those places, and I don't think they've actually gotten any new planning approval either.
Okay, thanks. Does nobody else want to go to the recommendation, which is straightforward this time, on page 202, 4 conditions and 1 informative. See those in favour of approving the application, please. I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. On to the last one, which is 160, Reading Road in Wokingham. And who's the case of? Simon Taylor again. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. This application involves the demolition of the existing bungalow. I'll just show you a photo of it there, single-storey dwelling, and its replacement with a 2-storey plus loft dwelling house. The elevation shown there. It lies just west of Woos Hill roundabout. It's been amended since its original consultation to remove a garage at the front of the site on street set grounds and 3 dormers that added to the building bulk. There's no consultee objections, although 3 resident objections have been received, including 2 of the adjoining property owners and an objection from Wokingham Town Council and the ward member. The primary concerns raised are drainage, overlooking and loss of light, and excessive bulk and scale that is out of scale with the surrounding development. Illustrated in terms of the height and the footprint. Dealing with drainage briefly, the site is recorded in the Environment Agency modelling to have experienced surface flooding, and it is envisaged that pre-commencement condition for drainage would take account of those concerns. There's no adverse outcome in terms of overlooking, dominance or overshadowing with the development according with the guidelines. You'll note here that it is broadly consistent with the front and rear building lines. There's obscure glazing noted to the first floor windows and its conditions as such. The roof lights on the top level are to a bedroom up this level. The sill height is 1.5 metres, which is considered to be acceptable in terms of limiting the outlook from those roof lights. Expanding on the overdevelopment, there references from residents and the ward member and the parish council about it being a 3-storey dwelling. We don't share that view. It's 2 stories plus a loft. There's also a concern that there's misrepresentation on the street elevation plans. On the latter, council acknowledges there's been some discrepancy on the plans in our view in terms of 162 Reading Road, which is the property to the left side of the property. There is also a change in ground level that would affect the perception of the levels. On the former, the overall height is the primary consideration here, and it's felt that the height is acceptable in the street scene. The dwelling is 2 stories. The loft is contained within a sloping roof space. The interpretation is that it is a 2-storey dwelling with roof lights. 9.5 metres is the height. It exceeds both of the adjoining properties, but that doesn't make the proposal unacceptable. It is 2 stories, which is broadly with loft, which is consistent in the street scene. Most of these dwellings that are listed here would, if they have the space within the roof, be able to accommodate loft space within their roof space without, as through permitted development rights. The only other matter of concern is tree protection. You'll note at the street there's some protected trees, sorry, not protected trees, some important trees. They're protected under the agricultural method statement. The members' update includes 3 additional objections that have been received since the agenda was set. These objections have raised concerns already addressed in the original submissions. Based on that, conditional approval is recommended subject to pre-commencement conditions relating to drainage, materials, biodiversity and boundary details. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have some speakers. First of all, Imogen Shepherd-Dubé, who's speaking as Wokingham Town Councillor. Good evening, Imogen.
Good evening. Hopefully you can see me. Hello. Good evening, everyone. Make no mistake, this application is for a very large 3-story building with at least 5 bedrooms. It is certainly not by any definition a 2-story building, as the officer's report seems to suggest. The ridge height of this building is expected to be 2.5 meters taller than the adjoining properties. The 3rd floor has a bedroom, a bathroom, and additional rooms. If this is not 3 stories, I'd really like to know what is. If you look at this location around where the building is hoped to be, they are all 2-story family homes with no larger buildings in sight. It is over 1.5 miles from Wokingham town centre, where there are some 3-story homes, but this is not a town centre location. The proposed building is also downhill from the neighbouring buildings, and the diagrams, very limited diagrams provided, do not show the street scene properly at all. I strongly recommend that if any member of this planning committee is not familiar with this location, that they ask for the opportunity to go and view this site. The application has changed since the town's council reviewed it. The external garage and the rear dormer has been removed, and we're quite thankful for that because they were quite excessive. But the 3rd floor windows and the 3rd floor usable space is still there. In fact, this application seems to have changed several times during the consultation phase, which I'm not sure is an acceptable way to be. We believe the height and the mass of this building is not in keeping with the surrounding and does not meet CP3, particularly CP3A of the core strategy, which requires buildings to be of an appropriate scale, activity, mass, layout, build form, height and character to the area without detriment to the amenities of the adjoining land users. Its size does not contribute to a sense of place or local character as mentioned in the Borough Design Guide. Above all, we do not want to see this application set a precedent for this particular area where homes of this size become the norm in these older neighbourhoods, particularly outside of the town centre. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Peter Mathers, if I pronounce that correctly, who's got a PowerPoint presentation. So please go ahead when it's up. Okay, thank you. Could you move on? Actually, move to the next. Could you move to the next slide? Actually, from here. That's it. Thank you. So actually, you've already seen a picture of this. So I'm Peter Mathers. I live at 162 next door to the applicant at 160. So this is the existing bungalow. If you go to the next slide, please. So this shows the bungalow on the right. You can see it in relation to number 158. And as you can see, 160 is not much lower than 158 at the moment. And 158 is a 2-story house with a shallow roof. If you move to the next slide, that shows the bungalow in relation to 158, very similar heights as they are at the moment. If you go to the next slide, so this is my house at 162, shown in relation to 164. So my house is a 1.5-story chalet bungalow. Please note the downward trajectory of the roof line from 164 to 162, which follows the downward slope of the road. The road continues to slope down to 160, so their road roof should be lower than ours. So I have 2 main concerns. First, height. Whether this is classified as 2.5 or 3-story, the applicant refers to it all the way through as a 3-story building. The fact is that the proposal will be substantially higher than both 158 and 162 and will have an overbearing impact on them, and it will disrupt the downward trajectory of houses following the slope of the road. In the officer's report on a pre-app submission for a care home across the site last year, Brian O'Donovan was concerned that the centre section of the building would be 3-story in height and significantly higher than the existing properties. The current application would be of a similar height, so approval will be inconsistent with the approach taken last year. Can we go back to the slide that we skipped over, please? So my second concern is glazing. The proposal includes 8 roof lights and 2 small round windows on the roof, which we believe is excessive. You can see these on the plan of the 3rd story. The 3rd story itself makes no sense. There is very little usable space, just bedroom 5 and a bathroom. The rest is a large hall and 2 big storage areas. Why does each storage area need 2 windows? Perhaps they're trying to get permission for the largest and tallest 3rd story they can, with as many windows as possible, and then reconfigure into more usable space with a 6th bedroom later.
In the pack, the officer states that roof lights on the side elevations would serve storage areas, hence no overlooking impact on the neighbours. This is not correct, as the roof lights in bedroom 5 are on side elevations. We would urge the number of roof lights be reduced and removed completely from side elevations, and those remaining be obscured glass. The applicant has failed to provide examples of properties in the vicinity which are similar in terms of height and the amount of glazing in the roof. This is because no examples exist. In the DAS, the applicant has included pictures of houses which he says are a precedent for 3-storey massing, but the vast majority are normal 2-storey houses which disprove his own claim. As the existing bungalow is in a state of disrepair, we would welcome development of the site, but our view is that this is an overdevelopment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Peter Lindley Hughes is the agent, please.
Good evening and thank you, Chairman. Can you all hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Yes, thank you for the opportunity to briefly address you in support of this application. As the officer's report covers our collaboration to date and addresses the majority of the points in the objection notice just made, will be fairly succinct. My name is Peter Lindley Hughes. I am the Director and Chartered Registered Architect of S11 Architects, acting as the agent to our clients, the existing tenants. Further to our previous statement, we are delighted to have the opportunity to design a sympathetic in-keeping scheme of high quality to replace the existing 1960s 2-storey dwelling, which no longer serves the existing family and is in desperate need of replacement. We have collaborated closely with the local planning authority officer and their colleagues to ensure the scheme is suitable with regards to material matters and local planning policy. Unfortunately, Baldeep could not make it this evening, who we've been collaborating with normally, so thank you for their colleague for covering tonight. Following the initial plans submitted, as covered, we have updated the plans to remove the rear dormer windows, which are the main issue for the massing and overlooking. And we do agree in this instance that the garage at the front is not in keeping with the local policy, despite the trees being screening, which was a discussion we wanted to have. And we have integrated the parking now into the dwelling massing instead. To address the volume of the space, it is a 3-storey dwelling with 2-storey massing, as the same way the existing is a 2-storey dwelling with 1.5-storey massing, if that clarifies things. Following our collaboration, no further material matters for review or amendments to the design were raised for consideration, and we are content the design reflects suitable development for the location. I think one of the main objections in the notices relate to flood risk. As noted, the Environment Agency clarified this as flood zone risk 1, which is the lowest category of flood risk. It does not normally require a flood risk assessment. However, because there is a high risk of surface water, we have written a flood risk assessment. The risk appears to be caused by levels generally across Wokingham, and it appears that no level of mitigation solely on the client's property is able to remedy this issue experienced both on the site and adjoining neighbours. Whilst it is my understanding the legal position is we are not responsible to mitigate neighbours' property issues, solely not to exacerbate them. During the upcoming detailed design, additional surface water flood mitigation measures are likely to be introduced, which have, in our experience, also benefited neighbouring dwellings. The flood risk assessment has been reviewed by the local drainage officer, and no further comments at this time, subject to a review on pre-commencement condition 4, which will be submitted at a later date. To conclude, the design carefully considers material matters and architectural best practice in the design of the dwelling to fit with the strong, diverse character of 3-2 plus Reading Road to create a high quality dwelling for the existing client and their future generations, with surface water mitigation measures to be defined. We remain in full support of this application, which continues with our history of strong collaboration with local authorities to achieve design excellence. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And finally, Rachel Bishop-Firth, who's the Woking Borough Councillor for Embrook, one of them.
Cheers, good evening. While I would support an appropriate new home being built on this site to replace the existing bungalow, I am concerned that this current proposal is not in keeping with this area. The buildings on this stretch of the Reading Road are all of them 1- and 2-storey homes. Looking at the houses in the area, it does appear that a few have had the loft area turned into habitable accommodation, mainly where the house was originally a bungalow. It's absolutely not an area where we're building 3-storey homes, but this plan, it is a plan for a 3-storey house. Now, the 3rd storey is in the roof area, but it's been built with the rooms in the roof area as full rooms, as for example, a bedroom. And that makes the house a full 2.5 meters higher than the neighbouring houses. And 2.5 meters, that is a full story. So I think this is out of keeping with the other homes, and I think it would set a problematic precedent for the development of this area. As well as being very tall, the square blocky design of the house also adds to the bulk of the proposed development, and the result is an overbearing building with bulk and mass out of character with the other homes in the road. I would therefore like to recommend that this particular design is rejected. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members. Okay, Rochelle.
I'm a little bit worried about precedent, and the agent themselves just called it a 3-story building. The agent did not call it a 2.5-story building. The agent did not call it a 2-story building. It's a 3-story building. And if it quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Therefore, this is a 3-story building. It's not a 2-story building. It's out of keeping with the area.
Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, there's a little bit of dispute about how many stories there are in this dwelling, but I think what can't be disputed is its height. And what concerns me is really the height of this building as compared with the adjacent ones. Seems to be very substantially higher. It's a great pity and that we weren't able to actually have in the plans, as far as I could see, unless I've missed it, a street scene, set of street scene elevations that would have given us a much better sense of what this could look like in terms of the relationship and whether it was indeed out of character with the area. So I'm very tempted to propose that we do adopt the suggestion made by Imogen that we have a site visit so that we can actually see for ourselves, because not all of us are familiar with this site, exactly what the existing dwellings around this proposed new dwelling look like and get a sense of what the relationship might be.
Do you have a second, Andrew? Thank you.
If I could, respond just briefly, I have visited the site again today, and I can provide you a bit of context for the street if you'd like, if that helps. You've got the existing petrol station there. It's the corner building opposite the petrol station. This is 158, and there's the bungalow in the middle of the site there. This is 162. And then heading further up Reading Road. So the dwellings are set back on the site. It does also slope down somewhat. This is opposite the site and opposite the site again. And just as some context, you'll see a red car there. It is slightly elevated. So this shows the slope through the site. And this is 162's ridgeline. And that's looking through 162 back to the site. The other plan that is beneficial that you asking for would be the elevation plan. So this does give the context of 158 and 162, although it is acknowledged that the council does view that 162 is misrepresented. So it's felt that 158 is appropriately represented, so you can get the context of the differences. But going back to the elevations, sorry, the photographs that have been provided before, if you're looking at it in the context of the wider street scene, it's not felt that it is excessively high in terms of its relationship with the other properties.
Thank you, Simon. That was helpful. But my principal concern is the relationship between the immediately surrounding dwellings, and I think we would be able to see that better if we had a site visit.
Okay, I'll just hear from other members first. Andrew?
Yes, thank you. And firstly, I'd like to begin by stating that I had no hesitation at all in supporting Stephen's recommendation for a site visit. I did earlier this week late last week, walked past all the homes, the near that property and all the nearby homes. And in this instance, I really think that there is no substitute, for a site visit. It's a complicated street scene. That notwithstanding, I do have quite a number of questions. There's been quite a lot of references already tonight to surface water accumulation, which seems to be acknowledged in the lengthy condition 4 on pages 222 to 223. Can officers confirm that a scheme that will mitigate against flooding has not yet been agreed, but rather it seems that condition forms suggesting various options that might be selected from? And I am concerned that it's possible that proposed building works might create a flood risk, both to this and to the neighbouring properties, that's not possible to avoid, even with some of the measures that are suggested in condition 4. And if that was the case, would this constitute a material planning consideration? Officers might also like to comment on. I'm sorry if I've misunderstood this, but I believe that there might be something in the new NPPF specifically about consideration of surface water accumulation. So I am very concerned about that. There seems to be quite a lot of dispute within the public documents pack about how the footprint present and applied for is measured. I'm prepared to accept that the conservatory can be included in the measurement of the footprint, but my calculations, the proposed footprint would appear to increase by something like 28.4%. I don't know how comfortable I am with that. What does concern me a lot more, though, is the implications of this for the bulk and the mass of the proposed building. And I'm just wondering if officers are able to provide any details of the increase. I don't know how these are measured, possibly in cubic meters or in percentage terms of the mass of the proposed building. Okay, so let's set aside the issue of the footprint, but the issue of bulk and mass. The neighbours at number 160 expressed concern that the proposed building would greatly reduce the amount of sunlight to the adjacent properties. I can't see any a discussion about that. I'd be interested for an officer response. I noted in the presentation and also in the documentation that the ridge height would be 2.5 meters higher than that of the properties on either side. The presentation, one of the tables in the presentation, seemed to show that the ridge height would be higher than all of the nearby properties that were presented in that table in the presentation, and in a number of cases substantially higher. So that does concern me. And then there's been some concerns raised about the impact of the 8 Velux windows and over dominance of glazing in the roof and the impact that this might have on the character of the area. And I can understand that concern. And I'm just wondering if officers could inform us whether there are any regulations or any guidance nationally or in local design guide and so forth relating to such a concern about the amount of glazing in the roof space and the impact on the character of an area.
Thank you. I'll just briefly share the surface flooding map. So, as distinct from river flooding or sea flooding, it's flood zone 1, but there's a risk of 1 in 30 years surface flooding. So it's concentrated in the rear of the site. The dwelling is concentrated in this area here. The intention is that the sustainable drainage details that are submitted, which is standard practice for pre-commencement condition, would ensure that there's no additional adverse impact beyond existing. So the measures to accommodate that would be dealt with at design stage, provided it complies with the condition. So in that respect, I don't think there's as the drainage officers raising concern with an increased footprint leading to additional overland flow or off-site infiltration of flow across the site or onto adjoining properties. I think they've satisfied that the impacts that would arise from development can be ameliorated through that condition. In terms of the reduction in the sunlight, the site the rear elevations are south facing, and the building line is consistent in the front and rear building line. So paragraphs 29 and 30 deal with that aspect in terms of once you've got a broadly south facing rear elevation, there will be some overshadowing in the morning to the west and in the afternoon to the east, but it's not sufficient to warrant refusal of the application. It also accords with the guidelines in terms of the council's requirement for 45-degree, meeting the 45-degree line. So I don't think that's a concern from our point of view. The slide that was provided did indicate there was it is higher than most of the properties in the street. That extends probably 50 metres either side. What we're saying is that there's a combination of bungalows and 1.5-storey developments in the street. Provision of a 2.5-storey dwelling or a 2-storey plus loft is not unacceptable. It perhaps is made worse by the fact that there's some bungalows in the street. That shouldn't weigh against the proposal in terms of it being a standard 2-storey plus loft addition. As I've noted before, a lot of the 2-storey dwellings in the street can accommodate a loft within their roof space, and there's no restriction on the number of roof lights that they impose in that. So that would then make it a 2.5-storey development. The MPPF does impose some restrictions in terms of design. In terms of the amount of roof lights within the roof space, there's nothing restricting the number of roof lights. In this case, we've just considered whether or not it retains its presence as a roof form as opposed to an additional storey. And in that respect, as it presents to the street, it's still a 2-storey plus loft development. One thing I did miss was the footprint and the massing. In the countryside, we apply a massing consideration in terms of the volume of the development, so height by area. In this case, it's within a major development location, so the consideration against the existing dwelling doesn't really come into play. We're considering the development in the context of the surrounding street and whether or not it accords with the guidelines in the Borough Design Guide. It meets the front, rear and side guidelines. It meets being the guideline in terms of being consistent with the predominant street scene of the existing and future desired character of the street. So in that respect, the development has an acceptable massing in the street.
Can I just ask for 1 or 2 points of clarification? I was alarmed to see the map showing the extent of the surface water flooding, because it would seem, from where we're seated here, that the extended property would actually take it well into the blue shaded area, which I'm assuming represented the surface water. So for a point of clarification, the drainage officer is saying that with the larger footprint, they are satisfied that the flooding, that the removal of the surface water, can be satisfactorily dealt with. That's the first point of clarification. And then second point of clarification is to do with the issue of mass. I think I've misunderstood this. You referred, Simon, to this being a consideration, I think, in countryside, but seem to be implying that this is not an issue in an urban, well, in an area such as we're talking about tonight. And I'm a little bit confused, about this, because it would seem to me, that we are talking about a very significant increase, in the mass, the volume, of, the proposed building.
In terms of the drainage, I think, yes, the drainage officer is satisfied. Generally, they look at the existing impermeable area and proposed. When there's an increase that needs to be offset in a way, and sustainable drainage measures look at a hierarchy of measures to accommodate satisfactory measures to ensure that there's no adverse impact on surrounding properties. And they go through the levels of soakways and rainwater butts and everything else, or discharge to the sewer. In this case, the drainage officer, is satisfied that the drainage measures will be able to accommodate the additional footprint that's arising from that. So I don't think it's been questioned at all. The massing question, what I was referring to, in the countryside, we need to consider the impact upon the openness and the rural setting of the countryside. And in that case, we apply a volumetric consideration against the existing dwelling. It's less significant in this case here because we're looking at how the development fits in with the surrounding development rather than how it impacts upon the countryside. So we don't ordinarily consider the volume or the area against the existing dwelling. It's an existing bungalow. It's effectively ripe for redevelopment because it's a small dwelling on a relatively large site. So it can accommodate a significant increase in built form. And so its consideration against the existing development doesn't really provide much.
Thanks. Carl.
Thank you, Chair. I know this road quite well because I used to live on Reading Road for about 5 years, a bit further up than this, but not quite well. Having said that, I think the idea of deferring it is something I would for a site visit would be something I'd support. It's interesting. There's objections on this from Woking Town, from 2 ward members, and a few neighbours. So it's like the full sweep on objections, really, and all on the same things. I find Mr. Mather's comments quite convincing because they tend to match what my notes are here. I was looking at the same things. I think Stephen's right. It doesn't really matter. This is 3 floors, but it is 3 floors. A loft does not have a hallway under any circumstances. So it's 3 floors, but it's not relevant because what's really important is the height. That's the problem here. And of course, having a 3rd floor does make it high, even if the roof is draped over it in some ways. As Andrew said, and mentioning the slide with the heights on it, it is 2.5 metres higher than the adjoining properties, but it is also quite a bit higher than most of the properties around it, further around, away from it. I think there was 2 which were 9 metres, and the rest were all below 8.4 metres, and most were below 8 metres. So there is a large difference. This is a large house on any measure, and I worry about, and I've seen this in my own ward on planning applications where the street scene is reported as being a certain way, and it then, oh well, there's a house over there that looks like that, so therefore now that's the street scene. In 5-10 years' time, maybe Mr. Mather will be back here with his 15-metre house proposal that this applicant will be moaning about, and where do we stop is kind of the question, really. So I'm making lots of comments and not questions, but I've got a couple of questions. Just one other comment though. I went on this application online and there was some artist views which I think have been supplied by the applicant. I won't go as far as say they're misleading, but when you looked at that house compared to Mr. Mather's house, they were the same size on that drawing, and yet we know it's 2.5 metres higher. So that was quite interesting what's going on. Right, so questions. One, why is this before us so quickly after there have been major changes to the design and a kind of lightning quick reconsultation, which no one responded to pretty much, which should have been an indicator that was being rushed. And a lot of the objections that have come into this and that are on the application have been done away with already because such as the garage and so on. I think, you know, we need a bit of time to spend on these things so people can see what's actually in front of them, can be properly consulted, and then decide what they want to say about that. I think that's messed this up a bit, I think. So why the rush there? And the other thing I want to talk about is what Mr. Mather mentioned, really. What I'm concerned about is overlooking. On page 231, paragraph 25, it details the roof lights on the side elevations on the roofs. And we're told that they can't be an overlooking issue as they serve storage areas. And one of those rooms is on the plans as a storage area stroke bedroom. And the other storage areas are very large, well, not very large rooms, but they are large rooms that could easily be bedrooms and converted. So do we have any way of making sure these remain storage areas? I doubt we have. But it seems to me that if we're not doing that, then what Mr. Mather says makes sense, that we should be looking at making them fixed and obscure. There's talk that they are 1.5 metres above floor level. And I'm sure that level is dropping because I'm sure we've mostly used 1.7 metres as our bottom limit for a sill roof light in the past. I mean, I'm quite short, as you all will know, and even I could probably look out of a 1.5 metre window. So somebody who's 6 foot tall is going to have no problem overlooking. So I think so those are my two questions, really. Do we have any way of making sure these remain storage areas? And you know, why has it been rushed after this reconsultation?
The application was reconsulted. It wasn't necessary. It was done to provide the neighbours with an illustration of the amendments that were made. Where there's reduction in built form or the deletion of the garage, deletion of the dormers, we're not obliged to reconsult. This one was out of allowing the residents an opportunity to review the plans. The consultation ended on the same day that the agenda closed, so it was either submit the application or wait another month. It was felt unnecessary to not submit the application to the agenda based on that one additional day, when the opportunity arose to consider any further submissions, of which there were no new issues raised in the supplementary agenda. In terms of overlooking, I guess there is nothing to restrict aside from the internal usability of the room itself, the dimensions of it, to restrict the change of the room from something other than storage. What was considered was that 1.5 metre sill height is slightly less than the standard. We apply 1.7. A lot of areas 1.6 metres is an eye level that's considered acceptable. 1.5 was considered acceptable in this case because it limits the outlook to more of a horizontal outlook rather than a downward outlook for the adjoining properties. And especially on its western side, it would the roof light to the front bedroom would be restricted further by the roof of the to its west itself as well. So 1.5, whilst it wasn't eliminating overlooking, the extent of the overlooking was minimised to the extent that it wasn't raised a concern.
I was just going to say, I think if we do end up deferring this for a site visit, I hope we do, it might be something that the applicant might want to think about in terms of making this a little bit easier. You know, these could be bedrooms one day, no doubt about it. I think it might be better if those windows were kind of more obscure or harder to look out of, higher, some change of design. And it sounded to me from what Mr. Mather said that sounded like, you know, a backstop position that he may, I might be kind of paraphrasing him, but he seemed to be happier with that if that was there. So I think something we can think about if this goes to further differing angles.
Thank you, Chairman. As Carl says, it is 3-storey, but it's not particularly relevant to this application. But I look at this application in a slightly different way. Surely there is an inevitable redevelopment of a street with older houses and especially bungalows to what people want and need in 2021. I have a number of mainly bungalowed streets, or were in my ward, where gradual rebuilding has occurred over probably 30, 40 years. It changes the character, but it does meet modern needs. And I think in looking at this application, we do need to balance that into what we're looking at in a way. Thank you.
Sam.
Thank you, Chairman. I have four main concerns regarding this development. I think, as mentioned previously, that the surface water accumulation for me looks like a real problem. I'm worried about the implication for this regarding excess surface water accumulation for neighbouring properties and the sort of surface water infiltrating that. Looking at the fact that there appears to be a slope as well, so I think on one side there's certainly a risk there. I'm also a little bit concerned about the impact of the overglazing. Particularly with regards to the implication on privacy on the neighbouring properties. And as sort of Carl mentioned earlier, due to the fact that there's potential windows in areas where we think they're saying there's going to be not a bedroom, but likelihood is that it looks like they're going to put a bedroom there. And my other concern is the height. I think the 2.5 metres higher than the adjoining properties is a real concern for me. And I think the final thing is I'm just really concerned that this may cause a change in the street scene, leading to more developments like this in the future, changing the whole street scene altogether.
Thank you. I don't think there was a question there. Rebecca.
My questions have mainly been answered really from what everybody has said, but I did have wanting some clarity really, but I feel it's been answered in about this 2.5 story, or is it a 3-story building? But I think that has been answered and it's not really relevant. My concerns are the same as everybody else about the height, so I don't have any other questions that I can ask.
If we want to have a site visit, then we ought to ensure that we're not getting into a position where we're going to refuse this because of the surface water problem. If there is a surface water problem, because we could refuse it on that basis here. So I don't know whether anyone would want to refuse the application on that basis alone.
Well, I think we wouldn't want to do that because it may well be that we're concerned, principally, given that we've got expert advice that the drainage problems, the potential drainage problems could be overcome. I think we'd be on a sticky wicket trying to refuse on drainage grants. We'd be going against technical advice that we can't really match. I think issues about height, bulk and massing are actually ultimately judgment issues. And I think while obviously we all respect the professional judgment of our planning officers, where there are areas that are more subjective, I think the committee has a right to a view. So with all due respect, Chris, I don't think we should attempt to refuse this on drainage grounds. I think we should go on the site visit and make an assessment of whether we think the likely impact in terms of height, bulk and massing is such that we might want to refuse on those grounds when it comes back next time.
Yes, I wasn't suggesting I was opposing the site visit. I was ensuring there wouldn't be much point going on the site visit if we wanted to refuse the application here for another reason. But I think I sense members don't want to refuse here. So I think if no one else wishes to speak, I'll just point out that you do need to show that there's harm in this application. It's true that it's quite a bit higher than the adjoining properties. It's only 0.5 metre higher than one further down the road. But Stephen rightly says that is a matter of judgment. So I'm happy to support the site visit, Stephen, as proposed, and Andrew seconded. Should I take a vote on that? Are those in favour? We're clear that the three things you mentioned, bulk, mass, overlooking, I think. Anything you want to add? Height? Oh, obviously height, yes. Okay, with those, is it clear? Callum's asked me, Simon, whether the applicant would extend the expiry date. Yeah.
Sorry, is that a question to me?
Well, to an officer.
I'm sure it can be arranged.
Okay. Okay, so can I see those in favour of the site visit, please show. That's good. Abstaining. One, two abstain. Right. Okay. So that is approved, and we will arrange a site visit. That concludes the last application for now. We have some briefly. We have some news on appeal decisions, which are two appeals which were dismissed. So continuing our run of excellent results at appeals. And with that, I think we'll close the meeting. Thank you very much. Good evening.